The Headless Horseman by Mayne Reid. Chapter 1. The Burnt Prairie. On the Great Plain of Texas, about 100 miles from the town of San Antonio, the hot sun was shining from a bright blue sky. Under the golden light appeared a few wagons covered with snow-white canvas. They were slowly moving across the prairie in the midday heat. The owner of the wagons was Woodley Poindexter, a sugar planter from Louisiana. Mr. Poindexter had lost most of his money and had left his home on the Mississippi River. He was going to a new home in Texas together with his family and black slaves. Mr. Poindexter himself was riding behind the wagons. He was a tall, thin man of 50 with a proud and severe face. He was wearing simple but rather expensive clothes and a straw hat. 2 horsemen were riding beside the planter, one of them on his right, the other on the left. The first one was his son Henry, a young man of 20. He was dressed in a sky-blue cotton shirt and trousers of the same material. There was a Panama hat on his head. Henry's face was open and cheerful. The other horseman was Henry's cousin. Captain Cassius Calhoun, that was his name, was an ex-officer of volunteers. He was wearing a dark blue military suit and a cap. Calhoun was 6 or 7 years older than Henry. There was also a carriage with 2 passengers. One was a young lady with the whitest skin. The other was a black girl. The young lady was the daughter of Woodley Poindexter, Louise. The black girl was her maid. Suddenly the wagon stopped. The worried manager came up to Woodley Poindexter. "What is it, Mr. Sansom?" asked the planter. "There's been a fire in the prairie. The grass is burnt and the ground is black." "What of that, Josh Sansom?" asked the planter's nephew. "How stupid of you to raise such a row about nothing." "But, Captain Calhoun," protested the manager, "how do we find the way?" "Find the way? What are you talking about? We haven't lost it, have we?" "I'm afraid we have, sir. The wheel tracks are no longer seen. They've burnt out along with the grass." "Can't we cross a burnt piece of prairie without wheel tracks? We'll find them again on the other side." "Yes," said Sansom, "if there is any other side. I don't see it." "Start moving," shouted Calhoun. "Keep after me." "Well, nephew," said the planter, "you know best." "Don't be afraid, uncle. I've made my way out of a worse fix than this. Drive on. Keep after me." The wagons of Woodley Poindexter started moving again. They made a mile or more, and then stopped. "Have you lost the way, nephew?" said the planter, riding rapidly up to Calhoun. "No, uncle, not yet," said the captain with less confidence. "I've only stopped to have a look. We should go in this direction, down that valley. Let them drive on. We're going all right. I'll answer for it." The mules went down the hill, then along the valley, then up another hill. An hour later the travelers saw wheel tracks and hoof marks of the animals again. "Our own tracks," said Calhoun. "What do you mean, Cassius?" "You don't say we've lost the way again?" asked the planter. "Yes, uncle, bad luck. We've made a couple of miles for nothing," said his nephew. He felt bad. It was his fault that the travelers had been left without a real guide. The ex-captain of volunteers had been rude to their guide, and the man refused to go with them. "What should we do now?" asked the planter. "We may have to spend the night on the burnt prairie, and we don't have enough water for the animals. How can we find the way?" No one had an answer to this question. Another 10 minutes was spent in deep moral and physical gloom. Then suddenly the cheerfulness returned. Everyone saw a horseman who was riding in the direction of the wagons. It was a miracle. "He's coming this way, isn't he?" asked the planter. "Yes, father," replied Henry. The young man took his hat and waved it. He also began shouting to attract the horsemen. But the stranger had already seen the wagons. He soon arrived on the spot occupied by the planter and his companions. He was a handsome young man of not more than 25, with a noble and friendly face. He was dressed in a picturesque Mexican costume, a short velveteen jacket, trousers laced along the seams, and leather boots with spurs. On his head he had a black sombrero decorated with gold. "A Mexican," whispered Henry. "So much the better," replied Poindexter in the same tone of voice. "He'll be more likely to know the road." "No," said the stranger with a protesting smile. "Anything but that. Have you lost your way?" "We have, sir," said Poindexter, "and we hope you will be so kind as to direct us." "Not much kindness in that. By chance I saw your trail as I was crossing the prairie. I saw you were in the wrong direction. I have come to set you right." "It is very good of you. We shall be most thankful, sir. My name is Poindexter, Woodley Poindexter of Louisiana. I bought a house on the Leona River near Fort Inge. We hope to get there before night. Can we do this?" "Yes, if you follow my instructions." "I'm sorry, Mr. Poindexter, I cannot stay. I need to get a very important document to the fort. Go straight forward for about 5 miles. Always keep the sun on your right shoulders. You will then see the top of a very tall tree, a cypress. Go directly to this tree. It stands on the bank of the river. You can cross the river there." The young horseman was about to ride off when something made him stop. It was a pair of lovely dark eyes. They were watching him with interest through the curtains of the carriage. He looked at the beautiful girl with admiration. "You are very kind, sir," said Poindexter. "The sun will surely show us." "I'm afraid it will not. Look at the sky. There are clouds in the north." "Stay," he continued after a pause. "I have a better plan still. Follow the trail of my lasso." He took his lasso from the saddle and threw the loose end to the ground. Then he said goodbye and rode off. The lasso left a clear line on the ground. "A very curious fellow," said the planter, as they stood watching the horseman. "I would like to know his name." "A very conceited fellow, I should say," said Calhoun. He had noticed the glance sent by the stranger in the direction of the carriage. "As to his name, I don't think it matters much. It mightn't be his own he would give you. Texas is full of such people, who take new names when they get here." "Come, Cousin Cash," protested young Poindexter. "You are unfair to the stranger. He looks, in fact, a gentleman." "A gentleman? Unlikely. I never saw a man in a Mexican dress who was a gentleman." Chapter 2. The Trail of the Lasso. It was easy for the travelers to follow the trail of the lasso. After a while they saw the cypress, but they didn't have enough time to reach it. The sky was now low and gray. On the northern horizon suddenly appeared a number of ink-colored columns, unlike anything ever seen before. They were changing size, shape, and place all the time. From these columns came terrible noises. The travelers immediately felt danger. The shouts of people and screams of the mules and horses filled the air. The noises were gradually growing louder. The danger, whatever it might be, was approaching too fast. The eyes of all were turned towards the low sky and the black columns that were coming on to crush them. At this critical moment, a shout reached their ears from the opposite side. They turned to see a horseman. He was riding towards them. The horse was black as coal. The rider was black too, even the skin of his face. But it was easy to recognize him. He was the stranger they had met before. "What is it?" asked the planter in alarm. "Is there a danger?" "There is, Mr. Poindexter. It's the norther. I didn't see it coming when I passed you. A norther is not usually so bad, but this one. Look there. Do you see those black columns? We've been wondering. We didn't know what to make of them." "They're nothing. Just the first signs of the storm. Look at the sky. Don't you see a coal-black cloud? That's what you have to fear. A hurricane is coming this way, and you have no chance to escape it." "Good God! Is the danger so great? Can we do anything to avoid it?" The stranger remained silent for a few seconds. "Yes, we can," he said. "There is a chance. I didn't think about it before. Order your men to cover the horses and mules with blankets. The storm can make the animals blind and they can go mad. When that's done, let all get inside the wagons." Poindexter gave the orders fast. "And you, sir?" asked the planter. "I know what's coming. It isn't the first time I have seen it. Get in, quick, or the dust cloud will be around us." The planter and his son got into the carriage. Calhoun remained seated in his saddle. Why should he listen to some man dressed as a Mexican? The stranger quickly took off his serape from the saddle and put it over the head of his horse. Then he covered his hat with a scarf. After that, he turned once more towards the carriage. He was surprised to see Calhoun still in the saddle. "Once again, sir, I ask you to get inside. If you don't, you may be a dead man." Cassius Calhoun reluctantly slipped out of his saddle and got into the carriage. To describe what followed is beyond the power of the pen. One of the sable columns broke, and down came a shower of black dust. There was a short interval of open atmosphere, hot as the inside of an oven. Then came cold winds, accompanied by terrible noises. In another moment the norther was around them. The atmosphere was as cold as the icebergs of the Arctic Ocean. Nothing was seen for over an hour. Finally the stranger said, "You can get out. The hurricane is over." "Sir," said the planter, "we have to thank you for "Our lives, father," cried Henry. "I hope, sir, you will give us your name." "Maurice Gerald," said the stranger, "though at the fort I am better known as Maurice the Mustanger." "A mustanger," scornfully said Calhoun, but only loud enough to be heard by Louise. "Only a mustanger," thought the aristocratic Poindexter. "You will no longer need either myself or my lasso now," said the hunter of wild horses. "Keep straight towards the cypress. As soon as you cross the river, you will see the flag over the fort. You may yet reach your home before night. Goodbye." And he rode off. Chapter 3. The Spotted Mustang. About a week after his arrival, the Louisiana planter invited guests to his new home for a housewarming party. Mr. Poindexter's hacienda was known as Casa del Corvo. The house itself was built where the Leona River makes a curve like the shoe of a horse, hence the name, Casa del Corvo, the House of the Curve. The architecture of Casa del Corvo, like that of other large country homes in Texas, was Mexican. It had only one story and a flat roof with railing all around. There was a courtyard inside the walls, open to the sky, with a fountain and a stone stairway leading up to the roof. The house had a massive wooden door with 2 or 3 windows on each side, protected by strong iron bars. The best part of a Mexican house was the roof. In fine weather, it is always fine in that sunny climate, the Mexicans preferred to spend evenings on the roof. The family of the Louisiana planter liked it too. On that same evening, Mr. Poindexter's guests gathered after dinner on the roof for a pleasant evening. There were officers from Fort Inge and old friends of the planter who, like him, had bought a home in southwestern Texas. Louise Poindexter moved about among the admiring guests with the smile of a queen. She was happy to be surrounded by friends or admirers, young planters, lawyers, statesmen. But in that splendid crowd there was a man who watched her every move. It was Cassius Calhoun. He followed her everywhere, not close, but like a shadow. He went from place to place, upstairs and downstairs, standing in corners, with eyes turned upon his cousin's face like a policeman on duty, and more than once it was noticed by those standing near. From time to time Louise came up to the edge of the roof and looked at the plain. Why she did so, no one could tell. No one was interested in her movements except Cassius Calhoun. He had thoughts about it, thoughts he didn't like. When a group of moving objects appeared on the prairie, the ex-officer of volunteers had more suspicion. "Wild horses," said the major from Fort Inge. "Someone is bringing them in," he added. "Oh, I see now. It's Maurice the Mustanger. He is coming this way, straight to your place, Mr. Poindexter." "I asked the young fellow to catch me some horses, Perhaps he's bringing me the first ones." "I am sure of it," said the planter's son. "I can tell the horseman is Maurice Gerald." The planter's daughter could see it too, but she tried not to show her interest. Her malicious cousin was still looking at her with great suspicion. Maurice came up sitting on his Mustang. He had a spotted mare at the end of his lasso. The color of the animal was dark chocolate, in places even black. With white spots over her skin, she looked like a jaguar. "What a beautiful creature!" exclaimed some of the guests. "It's such a pleasure to look at such an animal," said the major's wife. "Let's all go down. What do you say, Miss Poindexter?" "Oh, certainly," said Louise. The ladies went down the stone stairway, the gentlemen after them. Henry Poindexter hurried down before the rest and started talking with the mustanger. Maurice and Louise just nodded to each other. It was impossible for a planter's daughter to give a warmer welcome to a horse hunter. The society wouldn't like that. The major's wife alone greeted him in a nice way, but that was in a tone that told of superior position. He was more pleased to exchange quick glances with Louise. Many ladies smiled admiringly at the mustanger. In truth, the young man looked splendid, handsome and strong. "I'll pay you $200 for this horse," said the planter to Maurice, pointing to the spotted mare. "I cannot take your money," said the mustanger with a smile. "She is not for sale." "Oh, indeed," said the planter. He was disappointed. The other planters and the officers of the fort looked surprised. It was such a good price. $200 for a mustang. The usual price was from 10 to 20. The mustanger must be mad. "Mr. Poindexter," said Maurice, "you have given me a very good price for my other horses, and now I can afford to make a gift. In Ireland, when a man buys many horses, we make a special gift to one of the members of his family. Can we do the same thing in Texas?" "Oh, certainly, Mr. Gerald," said the planter. "Thank you. I would be happy to give this mare to Miss Poindexter, if she accepts my gift," said the mustanger to the girl. "I accept your gift, sir, thank you," said the girl, and smiled at the horse hunter. Why did Louise Poindexter, daughter of the proud Louisiana sugar planter, and a very beautiful girl, choose a poor horse hunter of Texas? She could marry the richest and the noblest men in the country. Louise didn't know the answer herself. She felt some strange interest in the mustanger. He was so different from the men from the society, and she knew that interest was much stronger now than a week ago in the burnt prairie. Chapter 4. A Prairie Picnic. The first rays from a rosy morning sun fell on a group of objects in Fort Inge. In the center of the group there was a small wagon. Little Mexican mules were eager to move off. Near the wagon there was a man of colossal size in a woolen coat. It was Zeb Stump, the hunter and tracker. He was sitting on his old mare. Other people were all moving from the wagon to the door of the officers' quarters and back again. Most of them were soldiers, 2 or 3 more, officers' servants. 2 more were cooks. A sergeant was in charge of the group. He was directing their movements. His task was to put in the wagon baskets of all shapes and sizes with food and drinks for a picnic. "Aren't you ready, Sergeant?" asked old Zeb. "How can I shoot a wild turkey when the sun is up in the sky? If you want a turkey for your guests, we must go now." "True, Mr. Stump. I know the Major wants a wild turkey. He told me so." The sergeant did all that was possible to hurry the departure of the wagon, with Zeb Stump as its guide. 20 minutes later, other people started to gather on the same spot. There were a lot of ladies on horseback. They were accompanied by their fathers, brothers, lovers, and husbands. Most, if not all, who had been present at Poindexter's housewarming party, were in Fort Inge that morning. The planter himself was there, as also his son Henry, his nephew Cassius Calhoun, and his daughter Louise. The young lady was sitting on the spotted mustang. The picnic was a simple return of hospitality. The major and his officers were the hosts, the planter and his friends, the invited guests. It was planned to go for about 20 miles to the south of Fort Inge, to hunt wild horses, hence the necessity for an early start. Just as the rays of the sun began to dance upon the crystal waters of the Leona, the party was ready to move. Like the party before them, they too had a guide, a handsome horseman in a Mexican costume. "Come, Maurice," cried the major at last. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there's a man in Texas who can show us how to hunt wild horses, it's Maurice the Mustanger." A 20-mile ride in the prairie was over in less than 3 hours. The picnic started long before noon, under the shade of a gigantic pecan tree, which stood near the banks of the Nueces River. "Wild mares!" cried a Mexican, who had been watching the prairie. "To the saddle!" was the thought on every mind. Before 100 could be counted, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, was in the saddle ready for the hunt. The wild mares appeared coming from the top of the hill. They were going at mad gallop. They saw neither the wagon nor the people around it. "Ladies and gentlemen," shouted Maurice, "keep your places. The mares are too excited. I know where they are going now. We shall find them again. If you pursue them now, they'll go into those woods and we won't find them." At that moment, Louise Poindexter suddenly separated from the crowd and followed the wild mares. Maurice realized that her spotted mustang was eager to join the other mares. Maurice, Calhoun, young planters, lawyers, and officers rode off to help the girl. 20 minutes later, everyone except Maurice was far behind. The wild mares, the spotted mustang with Louise, and the mustanger had the prairie to themselves. The chase continued for another mile without much change. Maurice was beginning to worry. "Come, Castro," he exclaimed. "What's the matter with you today? We need to overtake her. Remember, you overtook her before. What if I lose her? She'd be in trouble." The wild mares disappeared in the woods. As if their disappearances was a signal for the spotted mustang, it suddenly stopped. Maurice, continuing his gallop, came up in the middle of an opening. The girl was sitting silently in the saddle, as if waiting for him to ride up. "Miss Poindexter," he said, "I am glad that you are all right. I was beginning to worry about—" "About what, sir?" asked Louise. "Your safety, of course," he said, somewhat surprised. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Gerald. Was I really in any danger?" "Any danger?" asked the Irishman, with increased astonishment. "On the back of a runaway mustang? In the middle of the prairie?" "And what of that? My Luna couldn't throw me. I'm good in the saddle, sir. But you see, Mr. Gerald, I like a good gallop, especially in the prairie, where I'm not afraid of running over pigs or people. To tell the truth, I wanted fresh air and to be alone. I'm tired of too much talk and compliments." "You wanted to be alone?" said the mustanger, with a disappointed look. "I'm sorry, Miss Poindexter. I followed because I believed you to be in danger." "I am truly grateful, sir. You meant the Indians?" "No, not the Indians. It was not of them I was thinking." "Some other danger? What is it, sir?" Maurice did not answer. A sound made him turn away. At that moment the young men heard a scream, then another, and another, followed by the loud hammering of hoofs. It was no mystery to the hunter of horses. The words that came quick from his lips were a direct answer to the question she had put. "The wild stallions!" he exclaimed. "Is that the danger you meant?" "It is." "Are they really dangerous?" "They are only mustangs." "True, and at other times there is no reason to be afraid of them. But just now, at this season of the year, they become as savage as tigers." "What can we do?" asked the young lady. She felt fear for the first time. "If they attack us," answered Maurice, "we'll try to escape." "But, Mr. Gerald, why shouldn't we ride at once in the opposite direction?" "It's no use. On that side there's nothing but open prairie. They'll soon overtake us." I know a place where we shall be as safe as in Casa del Corvo, but it lies the other way. They are now on the way to it. If we start too soon, we may ride into their teeth. We must wait and try to steal away behind them. Are you sure you can control the Mustang?" "Quite sure," said Louise. She was afraid to lie in presence of the danger. Chapter 5. The Wild Stallions. Louise and Maurice remained seated in their saddles. The girl knew there must be some great danger. At the same time, she liked that the mustanger was worried about her safety. "I think we may try now," said the mustanger after a while. "Follow me." Suddenly, they heard loud screams, hammering of hoofs, and cracking of branches. It told of a terrible conflict between the wild stallions which were fighting. When Maurice gave the signal to start, the wild horses suddenly appeared in the opening. "This way!" cried Maurice. "They've discovered us! On! On! Miss Poindexter! Remember you are riding for your life!" Words were not necessary. It was clear that speed alone could save the spotted Mustang and its rider. The stallions went galloping after Louise and Maurice's horses. They were eager to overtake them. From that moment it became a chase across the prairie. Maurice was worried about Louise's mare. She was galloping slower and slower. "We keep our distance, don't we?" asked the girl. She noticed his worried look. "So far, yes. But we shall have to get over something. I know you are a good rider. What about your mare? You know her better than I. Do you think she can carry you over?" "Over what, sir?" "You'll see in a second. We should be near the place now." The riders soon approached an arroyo, wide and deep. It must be crossed, or the stallions would overtake them. Maurice knew that his own horse could go over it. He had done it before. But the mare? "Do you think she can do it?" he asked. "I'm sure she can," said Louise. "Come, Luna, show him one of those jumps which you can do." Without even waiting for the mustanger, the brave girl approached the edge of cliff and easily jumped across the arroyo. There were two thoughts on the mustanger's mind. The first was simple astonishment. The second, admiration. The stallions stopped at the edge of the cliff. They couldn't bring themselves to jump. The riders were safe now. "You know horses very well, Mr. Gerald," said Louise. "I am a mustanger," said the young man. "I hunt wild horses." "How do you do it?" "My weapon is this, the lasso. You use it with great skill. I've heard that you do." "It's nice of you to say that. But you are mistaken. The Mexicans do it much better." "You're too modest, Mr. Gerald. Can I learn to throw the lasso?" asked Louise. "I know a lady who is very good at it," said the mustanger. "An American lady?" "No, she's Mexican. She lives on the Rio Grande, but sometimes she comes to the Leona to see her relatives." "A young lady?" "Yes, about your own age, I think, Miss Poindexter." "Is she tall?" "Not so tall as you." "Does it take long to learn to throw the lasso?" said Louise. "Or am I too old to start now?" "Not at all. It's possible with a year or two's practice to become very good at it," said Maurice. "I myself have only been 3 years at it, and—" He saw that Louise was not listening to him any more. "Perhaps you want to get back to your family and friends," he said. "Your father may be worried by your long absence." "Ah, true," said the girl. "I was not thinking of that. Let us go back." Maurice took the girl to the spot of the picnic using the shortest way. The planter's daughter was surprised to see around herself beautiful flowers, green grass, and blue horizon. "It's so beautiful," exclaimed the girl. "Do you admire these wild scenes, Miss Poindexter?" "Admire them? Something more, sir. I see around me all that is bright and beautiful in nature. I would like to live under those trees." "I'm afraid, miss, you would soon be tired of such a rude life. No roof, no society." "And you, sir?" How is it you are not still tired of it? How do you live? Have you got a house?" "It doesn't deserve such a name," laughed the mustanger. "It's a hut." "Where is it? Anywhere near where we've been today?" "It is not very far from where we are now, a mile perhaps." "How I should like to have a look at it. A real rude hut, you say? Only a mile, you say?" "A mile there, the same to return, would be 2. "That's nothing. It would take us a few minutes," said Louise. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gerald. I did not think of it. Perhaps you do not live alone." "Oh, yes, I have a companion, one who has been with me ever since Before the mustanger could finish his phrase, the planter's daughter imagined a dark-haired girl of her own age with a lasso in her hand. "It's my foster brother, Phelim. He's glad to see visitors at any time." "I shall be happy to meet him." Louise Poindexter paid a visit to the mustanger's hut on the Alamo River. She noticed with surprise books and writing materials. She talked to Phelim O'Neill and tasted everything he offered. Finally she left in high spirits. On the way back to the place of the picnic, Maurice and Louise met Cassius Calhoun. The girl told her cousin about the chase and the jump over the arroyo. The mustanger didn't say a word. The ex-captain felt black jealousy. He was sure that Maurice the mustanger had become his most powerful rival. Chapter 6. Whiskey and Water. Almost everyone who had taken part in the hunting expedition visited the saloon at Fort Inge Hotel that evening. The subject of most conversations was the picnic. "Did you notice Calhoun as he came back?" asked one of the officers. "He looked rather unhappy," said the major. "But surely, Captain Sloman, you don't mean—" "Jealousy, and nothing else." "What, do you mean to say that he's jealous of Maurice the mustanger?" "Poh, poh, impossible." "And why, Major?" "My dear Sloman, Louise Poindexter is a lady, and Maurice Gerald a horse hunter." "Ah, gentlemen," said Sloman, shaking his head, "you don't know Miss Poindexter so well as I do. An eccentric young lady, to say the least of her. You may have already seen that for yourselves." "Come, come, Sloman," said the major. "A mustanger? Poh, poh." "He's an Irishman, Major, this mustanger, and if he is what I have some reason to suspect—" "Whatever he is," said the major, "he's here. You may learn everything from him." "I don't think you will," said Sloman, as the other officers turned towards the newcomer. The mustanger came up to the counter and asked for a glass of whiskey and water. The officers were about to ask him a few questions when another man entered the saloon. It was Cassius Calhoun. It could be seen that the ex-officer of volunteers was under the influence of drink. "Come, gentlemen," he cried to the officers. "Drinks all around. What do you say?" "Agreed," replied several voices. "You, Major?" "With pleasure, Captain Calhoun." Apparently by accident, Calhoun stood next to Maurice Gerald. The mustanger was at that moment quietly drinking his whiskey and water and smoking a cigar. The two men were back to back. "A toast," cried Calhoun, taking his glass from the counter. "America for the Americans, without foreigners, especially the Irish." After that he stepped back and pushed the mustanger with his elbow. As a result, Maurice's drink spilt on his shirt. Was it an accident? No one believed it was, even for a moment. The mustanger put his glass on the counter, then drew a silk handkerchief out of his pocket and started to wipe the wet shirt. "I am an Irishman," said the young man. He returned his handkerchief to the place from which he had taken it. "You?" asked Calhoun, turning round. "You're an Irishman? I thought you were a Mexican, judging by your shirt." "I don't know why my shirt concerns you, Mr. Cassius Calhoun, but as you spilt half my whiskey on it, I'll do the same." The mustanger took up his glass. Before the ex-captain of volunteers could get out of the way, Maurice splashed the rest of the drink into his face. Calhoun drew his revolver from its holster. The mustanger did the same. The two men were ready to shoot. "Hold," said the major. "Why?" shouted Calhoun in anger. "Why, Major Ringwood, after an insult like that, and from a low fellow like him?" "You were the first to do it, Captain Calhoun." "I don't care. Stand out of the way, Major. The quarrel is not yours. You have no right to interfere." "Indeed, ha! I have no right to interfere. Do you know where you are, sir? This, sir, is a military post, and I am the commander. I order you to return your revolver to the holster from which you have taken it," said the major. "You will have a chance to kill one another if you like, but not just now. You must understand, Mr. Calhoun, that you may hurt other people. Wait till the rest of us can move to a safe distance." Calhoun and Maurice lowered their revolvers, but they were still holding them in hand. "I suspect you still want to fight," said the major. "I have no particular wish for it," modestly answered Maurice. "If Mr. Calhoun apologizes for what he has said, and also what he has done—" "He should do it. He began the quarrel," said some of the officers. "Never," scornfully said the ex-captain. "Cash Calhoun will do nothing of the sort. Apologize indeed, and to a monkey like that." "Enough!" cried the young Irishman, for the first time showing serious anger. "I gave him a chance for his life. He refuses to accept it. Now we don't both leave this room alive. Major, I insist that you and your friends go away. I want to put an end to it." "Ha, said the ex-captain, laughing. "A chance for my life. Go away, all of you. I'll show him." "Stay," cried Major Ringwood. "There must be a signal for the duel. Neither should fire till it is given. Can anyone suggest anything?" "I think I can," said Captain Sloman. "Let the gentlemen go outside along with us. There is a door at each end of the room. Let them enter again, one at each door. Then they can fire." "The very thing," said several voices. "And what for a signal?" asked the major. "A shot?" "No, ring the hotel bell." "Nothing could be better," said the major. All of the visitors of the saloon hurried into the street. "Major!" screamed Mr. Oberdoffer, the owner of the hotel and the saloon. "Surely the gentlemen are not going to shoot their guns inside the saloon. They'll break all my bottles, and my splendid-looking glasses, my crystal clock." "No doubt you'll be paid for the damage," said the major. "If you stay in your saloon, you'll get a bullet through your body, and that would be worse than the breaking of your bottles." Chapter 7. A Duel. The night was rather dark, though there was still light enough to see a lot of people outside the saloon. They knew that something unusual was going on in the square. The spectators were standing about a dozen yards from the building. They were watching the movements of two men, one at each door. Both were looking into the saloon, where no sound could be heard. Both were in their shirt sleeves without hats. Each had a six-shooter in his hand. The men were waiting for a signal for the duel. Finally, the hotel bell rang. The duelists rushed inside the saloon. The first shots filled the room with smoke. Both kept their feet, though both were wounded. The second shots were also fired at the same time. Then came a single shot, quickly followed by another. Then there was silence. Were both dead? No, more shots proved that both were still alive. Then more shots, and then a single shot, the 11th. The crowd of spectators in the street was listening for the 12th shot, but instead of it, they heard the voice of the mustanger. "My gun is at your head. I have one shot left. Make an apology or die." After a while, the other man spoke. It was Calhoun. "Enough. Drop your gun. I apologize," he said almost in a whisper. The duel between Cassius Calhoun and Maurice Gerald caused something more than the usual interest. It was the subject of conversation for 9 days. Calhoun was disliked in the fort for his arrogance, and there was almost universal satisfaction at the result of the duel. Both men had to stay in bed. The wounds were serious. In the hour of his triumph, Maurice had fainted from loss of blood. He had been taken to a small room upstairs. Phelim came to the hotel to stay by his side. "Do you know what the owner is talking about?" said Phelim. "He's going to make you pay for the bottles and glasses and other things that were broken that day." "Me pay?" "Yes, Master Maurice, and not that Yankee." "What reason did he give for saying that I should pay?" "He said that you were the bird in the hand, and he would keep you till you paid for everything." "He'd better present his bill to the bird in the bush. I'm ready to pay for half the damage done, no more. You may tell him so if he speaks to you about it. And, to tell you the truth, Phelim, I don't know how I can do even that. I'm afraid we'll have to sell my silver cup, and perhaps my gun." "Don't say that, master. How will we live if the gun goes?" "As we can. The lasso will help us." At that moment a maid appeared in the door with a big basket. "A gentleman's brought this to you," she said. In the basket Phelim found a few bottles of wine, sweets and delicacies from the kitchen. "A gentleman," she says. "A kind gentleman, I say," said Phelim. "Who do you think he was, master?" "I have no idea, and there's no note. Some of the officers of the fort?" "No, it was packed by a woman." "Nonsense, Phelim. I know no lady who should take so much interest in me." 2 days later the second basket arrived, then the third. In the last basket there was finally a letter. "It's only Isidora," said the mustanger. He opened the letter and read, "Dear Sir, I have been staying for a week at the house of Uncle Silvio. I have heard about your wounds, and I am sending you some little things. Please make use of them as a souvenir of what you did for me. I write in the saddle. In another moment I am leaving the hacienda. Isidora Covarubio de los Llanos." "Thanks. Thanks, sweet Isidora," whispered the mustanger. "She is so nice to me. But I can't love her. I love Louise Poindexter." Cassius Calhoun spent all his time in his room. He was a selfish man and had no friends. The only person he loved was his cousin Louise. Calhoun knew that she didn't love him, so he planned to influence her father, Woodley Poindexter. The planter had lost almost all his money. Cassius Calhoun was, in fact, the real owner of Casa del Corvo. The ex-captain felt he was a defeated man in the eyes of Louise. But what was even worse, he'd been defeated by his rival. Maurice the mustanger must die, if not by Calhoun's own hand, then by the hand of another, and he knew the very man. There was a Mexican at the time, like Maurice himself, a mustanger. He was one of those who had carried Calhoun home on the night of the duel, and he was Maurice's enemy. Calhoun invited the Mexican for a talk. The mustanger made no secret of his hostility to Maurice Gerald. He said nothing about the reason. Calhoun guessed that it was the same as in his own case, a woman. The Mexican did not give the name. The only thing Calhoun knew was that it was some dark-eyed girl from a place on the Rio Grande. The ex-captain and the Mexican met several times, possibly discussing plans of revenge. The outside world only knew that Calhoun's new friend was Miguel Diaz, known by the nickname El Coyote, or Prairie Wolf. Chapter 8. On the Roof. It was early morning. Louise Poindexter was standing on the roof of the house in Casa del Corvo. Was she looking at a beautiful landscape? No, she was worried about the young mustanger. Suddenly, a horseman rode out of the woods and headed towards the hacienda. Louise recognized him. It was Zeb Stump, the hunter. "The man I need," exclaimed the girl. "Perhaps he can tell me how he is." After a while, the rider approached the gate. "Dear Mr. Stump, I'm so glad to see you. Come up here. There's a nice view from this roof." The old hunter joined the girl on the roof. "Tell me, Mr. Stump," said Louise, and looked into Zeb's gray eyes. "You must know everything. How is he? Are his wounds dangerous?" "If you mean Mr. Calhoun—" No. I know all about him. I'm speaking not about Mr. Calhoun." "Well, Miss Louise, there's one other man who is wounded too, and it's Maurice the mustanger. Are you speaking about him?" Yes, I know about his quarrel with my cousin. You see, I have my reasons to be worried about Mr. Gerald's health. He saved my life. Twice, I may say. Tell me, is he in great danger?" "Not at all," said Zeb. "He's got 2 bullet holes. One is just above the ankle, and the other in his left arm. The wounds are not dangerous, but he lost a lot of blood. He's all right now. He says he's going to be out of doors in a couple of days." "Where is he?" "He is staying at the hotel. That's where the duel took place." "Stay here, Mr. Stump, till I come up to you again," said the girl, and went downstairs. Soon she came back. She was carrying a basket. "Dear old Zeb, you will take this to Mr. Gerald. These are little things sick people would like to eat and drink." "Certainly, Miss Louise," said the old hunter, "though, as far as I know, he's already got a couple of baskets." "From whom?" "From some Mexican woman. Her servant brought them to the hotel. I've seen them myself today, not far from here." Louise Poindexter realized she had a rival, perhaps something more. It was not by accident that the basket fell from her hands on the stone floor of the courtyard. For the first time in her life, Louise Poindexter was jealous. It was her first real love. She was in love with Maurice Gerald. "I'm sorry about the basket," she said. "After all, Mr. Gerald doesn't need these things. Come, Mr. Stump, it's getting hot up here. Let us go down and find you a glass of your favorite whiskey. Come." Later, Louise thought much about Zeb's words. "This Mexican woman and her servant will be coming back from Fort Inge soon," she told herself. Louise ordered the spotted mare to be saddled and rode out in the direction of the fort. Soon she met her rival. It was a young lady, not older than herself. Her hair was black, and the face was charmingly attractive. The girls only exchanged short glances. But as they too rode on, going in opposite directions, both turned round in the saddle for a second glance at the other. "Beautiful," told herself Louise. "Yes, too beautiful to be his friend. He loves her." During the next 3 days, she saw the Mexican lady once again from the roof. She knew more about her now. Isidoro Covarubio de los Llanos lived in her father's house on the Rio Grande. Her uncle had his hacienda on the Leona, a mile from Casa del Corvo. She was an eccentric young lady, as some people thought, and she was good at throwing the lasso. There was an interval of several days during which the Mexican lady was not seen again. Then early in the morning, Louise saw Maurice Gerald. The mustanger was slowly riding down the road. Louise quickly hid behind the railing of the roof. The horseman stopped by the side of the road and remained there for a long time watching Casa del Corvo. Then Maurice rode on. He returned an hour later. Louise was sure that he had visited Isidoro Covarubio de los Llanos. The next morning she saw Maurice again. As on the day before, she hid behind the railing. As on the day before, he stopped to watch the hacienda. Louise's heart was full of hope and fear. There was a moment when she was ready to show herself, but at the next moment he was gone. Where? Where if not to meet Isidora? The jealous heart of the girl could hold out no longer. She must find out. In less than 20 minutes after that, a spotted mare with a lady on its back, appeared on the same road, and riding in the same direction. Soon she reached the top of a hill and looked at a house surrounded by tall trees. It was the hacienda of Silvio Martinez, the uncle of Isidora. For some time she watched the hacienda. No one was seen at the house or near it. Suddenly she heard a noise and looked below. The mustanger was riding up the hill directly towards her. He was alone. There was nothing to show that Isidora had recently been with him. "Good morning, Miss Poindexter," said the mustanger. "Are you alone?" "I'm alone, sir, and why not?" "True, I think I've heard you say that you prefer that sort of thing." "Don't you like it yourself, Mr. Gerald?" "Yes, to tell the truth, I like it very much. I live at the hotel. It's a noisy place. That's why I like to ride along this quiet road." "I believe you come here often." "Often? I have been only twice down this road. But, Miss Poindexter, may I ask you how you knew that I go this way at all?" "Oh," said Louise, and she blushed. "I spend much time on the roof. The view, songs of the birds, it's a nice spot, especially in the morning. I saw you as you passed." "You saw me, then?" asked Maurice. "How could I help it?" said Louise. "The road is not far from the house. I even saw a lady called Isidora." "Isidora? Ah, true, she has been here for some time." "And has been very kind to Mr. Maurice Gerald." "Indeed, it is true, she has been very kind. But I've had no chance of thanking her, and now she has gone back to her home on the Rio Grande." "Are you telling the truth, sir?" "Of course. I have not seen her," said Maurice. "She sent me some delicacies while I was ill, so I knew she was here. Isidora is grateful for a small thing I once did for her." "May I ask what it was, Mr. Gerald?" "Oh, certainly. I once saved her from some rude Indians, Wildcat and his Seminoles. They captured her while she was making a journey from the Rio Grande to visit her uncle on the Leona, Silvio Martinez. It's his house you can see from here." "A small thing, you call it? You are modest, Mr. Gerald. A man who would do that much for me." "What would you do for him?" asked the mustanger. "I'd love him," said the girl. "Then," whispered Maurice into Louise's ear, "I would give half my life to see you in the hands of the Indians, the other half to save you from the danger." "Do you mean this, Maurice Gerald? Do you really mean it?" "I do," said Maurice. Louise Poindexter laid her hands on Maurice's shoulder and kissed him. Chapter 9. Comanches on the Warpath. There was no open war in Texas with the Indians at that time, but they were still a topic of discussion at the breakfast, dinner, and supper tables. In the planter's hacienda, as in the hunter's camp, people were less afraid of wild animals than of the Indians. The Poindexters knew little about the Indians, but they believed that the danger was real. About 2 weeks after the picnic in the prairie, they received a letter from the fort. It came in the early morning and was put into the hands of the planter. He was sitting at the breakfast table, together with his daughter Louise, his son Henry, and his nephew Cassius Calhoun. "Unpleasant news, father?" asked his daughter. "The Comanches are on the warpath," so writes the major. "Is the major sure of it? What does he say, uncle?" asked Calhoun. "Last night, Wildcat, the Seminole chief, came to the fort with some of his men. He said that the Comanches all over Texas had been dancing the war dance for more than a month. Some of the Comanches can be expected in these parts at any moment." "And Wildcat himself?" asked Louise. "Can we trust this Indian? He appears to be as much an enemy to the whites as to his own people." "Quite true, my daughter. You have described the chief of the Seminoles almost in the same words as I find in the letter. The major thinks that this two-faced old rascal will take sides with the Comanches. Well, I hope we shall not see any redskins in Casa del Corvo, either Seminoles or Comanches. And Louise, continued the planter, please don't ride out alone. Henry must be with you, or your cousin Cassius. Why, father? I have often ridden out alone, asked his daughter. Yes, perhaps too often, said the planter. Louise didn't like his words, but she didn't ask for an explanation. Remember, my child, you are not in Louisiana, where a lady may travel anywhere. In Texas, there are Indians, and other criminals. I'll do what you want, father, said Louise, rising from the breakfast table. She went to her room thinking, what does that mean? Does father know that we met? Calhoun left the dining room after his cousin. He was already strong enough to have walks. That morning he went up to the river in the direction of Fort Inge. Halfway between the hacienda and the fort, there was the hut of Miguel Diaz, the Mexican mustanger. He was better known in Texas as El Coyote. Ah, Captain, come in, said the horse hunter. Sit down, take a chair. Calhoun was tired after his long walk. He took a chair and sat down. Mr. Diaz, he said, I have come for— Oh, I know well enough why you are here. You want me to kill that Irishman. Well, I promised you I would do it for $500. I will, but the time's not come yet. What if somebody finds out? I can't risk that. I hate the Irishman as much as you do, but I must wait for the time and the chance. You said you could easily do it if there was any Indian trouble going on. Of course I said so, if there was. You have not heard the news, then? What news? That the Comanches are on the warpath. Is that right, Captain? Yes, the news has just reached the fort. I know that from Major Ringwood. In that case, answered the Mexican, Maurice may die. The Comanches can kill him. Ha ha! You are sure of it? Yes, but $500 is not enough. His scalp is worth $1,000. $1,000, then. Do you promise it? I do. Then the Comanches will get his scalp. Calhoun left the hut. $1,000 for killing the man I wanted to kill myself, said Diaz. The Comanches are on the warpath. Can it be true? If so, I must find my old Indian costume. It's time to use it again, after these 3 long years of peace. Louise Poindexter not only stopped riding out alone, but refused to do so in company. If there was any danger on the outside prairie, it was safe in the garden behind the high wall of the hacienda. In fact, Louise didn't need to ride out to meet Maurice. They could see secretly each other in the garden. Maurice had already visited Casa del Corvo twice. The mustanger and the planter's daughter agreed to meet again. About midnight, Maurice crossed the river in a small boat. He stood under the shadow of a big oak, waiting for the girl. Chapter 10. In the Garden. The mustanger didn't have to wait for Louise long. At the very moment when he was stepping into the boat, a small white hand opened a window. After a while, a girl appeared on the top of the stairway that led down to the garden. She could be no other than Louise Poindexter. The girl noiselessly passed the statues and shrubs, and arrived under the shadow of the oak to meet Maurice. I need to tell you something, love, said the young man. Tomorrow I am going to the Alamo. Why? Asked Louise, worried. I have excellent reasons for going, said the mustanger. Excellent reasons? Do you want to meet anyone there? Phelim, no one else. I sent him out about 10 days ago, before the news about the Indians. I'll stay there only for a day or two. I'm going to put an end to my prairie life. I don't understand what you mean. It's very simple. I've made a very important decision. I know you will forgive me when you know about it. Forgive you, Maurice? For what? For keeping it a secret from you. That I am not what I seem. And one more thing. Yesterday, I received an important letter from Ireland. I'll need to go there for a short time. I'll return soon and prove to your proud father, the poor horse hunter, who's won his daughter's heart. Have I won it, Louise? Won it? You know you have more than won it. The lovers didn't hear the footsteps on the gravelled path of the garden. They didn't see the dark shadow which was hiding behind statues or trees. The listener, in fact, could hear every word. He could see all their movements. Was it Cassius Calhoun? Yes, it was he. It was by accident the cousin of Louise Poindexter found out the truth he didn't like. At midnight, Calhoun went to the roof to smoke a cigar. He was standing with his arms crossed when he saw a horseman near Casa del Corvo. The stranger crossed the river and made his way into the garden. Was he a thief? Then the ex-captain saw Louise. Who could this man be but Maurice the mustanger, he thought. Calhoun hurried down the stairs, made his way through the house, and out into the garden. He was witness to their kisses. He learned about the mustanger's plan to leave in the morning, and about his promise to return. The ex-captain was so angry that he was ready to kill his rival with a knife. But something stopped him. Something made him hurry back in the direction of the house, leaving the lovers. Where did Cassius Calhoun go? Certainly not to his own room. He went to the room of his cousin, young Henry Poindexter. Calhoun didn't need a candle. Henry's room was filled with moonlight. The ex-captain came up to the bed with mosquito curtains. "Wake up, Henry, wake up," he said. He shook Henry's shoulder. "Oh, you, Cousin Cash, what is it? Not the Indians, I hope." "Worse than that, worse. Quick, get up. Quick, or it will be too late. Quick, or the name of Poindexter will be the laughing stock of Texas." After such words, the youngest Poindexter got up and stood on his feet in the middle of the floor in surprise. "Don't wait to dress," cried Calhoun. "Stay, you may put on your pants." "What is it, Cash? What does it all mean?" asked the young man. They ran out into the garden. "See for yourself," said Calhoun. "Look through that opening in the trees. Do you see anything there?" "Something white. It looks like a woman's dress." "It is that. It's a woman." "It is a woman. Who do you think she is?" "I can't tell. There's another figure by her side. Is it a man?" "It is a man. That man is Maurice the mustanger." "And the woman?" "It's Louise, your sister, in his arms." These words made Henry jump. "Go and take this," said Calhoun. He passed his own knife and gun into the hands of his cousin. As if a shot had struck him through the heart, the brother rushed along the path. "On, my boy, see that you don't hurt her. Shoot at him, and then go at him with the knife if you miss. Don't give him a word of warning. I'll stay near and take care of you if you get into danger." In 6 seconds, Henry was by his sister's side. "Louise," he cried, "stand aside and give me a chance of killing this scoundrel. Aside, sister." For Henry to shoot at the mustanger was to risk taking his sister's life. So he paused before pulling the trigger. The girl suddenly threw her arms around her brother. "Go! Go!" she shouted to Maurice. "My brother is wrong. Leave me to explain. Away, Maurice." "Henry Poindexter," said the young Irishman, "I am not the scoundrel you think I am. Give me time, and I shall prove that I deserve her confidence and love." Henry's struggle to get from his sister's arms became less energetic. Maurice was on his way back to the wild prairies. "Oh, Henry, you are wrong," cried Louise. "Believe me, brother, he is a gentleman. He's a noble man, and I love him. Oh, brother, why did you insult him?" "Have I done so?" "You have, Henry, rudely." "I shall go after and apologize. I shall go now. I liked him when we first met. You know I did. Sister, come back into the house with me. You'd better go to bed. As for me, I'll ride to the hotel. I hope I can still overtake him and apologize for my rudeness." Louise and Henry returned to the house. As soon as they got inside, a third figure appeared from the shrubs and followed them up the stone steps. It was their cousin, Cassius Calhoun. He, too, had thoughts about the mustanger. Chapter 11. The Travelers on the Same Road. Such a fool! And I am a fool myself. There was a perfect chance for me to shoot that horse hunter from behind the tree, and without risking anything. My cousin, a young lady, deceived by a scoundrel. No word against it. Such a chance. Why have I missed it? And now this baby is going to apologize to the man who has made a fool of his sister. Those were the thoughts of the ex-captain of cavalry, Cassius Calhoun. He came up to the stable of Casa del Corvo. At that moment, a man pushed the door wide open. A saddled horse was following him. The man had a Panama hat on his head and a cloak around his shoulders. It was Henry. "Fool! You've let him off?" said the ex-captain. "Give me back my knife and gun. Why didn't you use them as I told you? You've made a mess of it." "I have," said the young man. "I know it. I've insulted a noble man." "Insulted a noble man? Ha, ha, ha! You're mad." "I have done enough to deserve being called worse than mad." "Where are you going?" "After Maurice the mustanger, to apologize to him for my rudeness." "Ha, ha, ha! Surely you are joking." "No. If you come along with me, you will see." "Then I say again, you are not only mad, you're an idiot." "You're not very polite, Cousin Cash." Without any other word, the young gentleman jumped into his saddle and rode off. Calhoun hurried to his own room and took his coat. Then he came out again, went to the stable to get his own horse. For a mile or more, Calhoun followed the same road that had been taken by Henry Poindexter. When he was about halfway between Casa del Corvo and the fort, he took another road, saying to himself, "There's still a chance, a good one, though not so cheap as the other. It will cost me $1,000. What of that? I need to get rid of this Irishman, who has poisoned every hour of my existence. Coyote will get before him on the road. He spoke of his hut upon the Alamo. The Mexican must know the place, or the trail leading to it. The owner may never reach it. There may be Indians upon the road." Calhoun arrived at the door of the hut of the Mexican mustanger. The door was wide open. Miguel Diaz was snoring. The captain couldn't wake the mustanger. The man was drunk. "Another chance lost," said Calhoun through his teeth. "All this night it's been against me. No use staying here. It might be morning before he wakes up. I may as well go back to the hacienda and wait there. Or else... Calhoun said nothing more, but it was clear he had made a decision. He jumped into his saddle and rode off. Just at the time when Calhoun was leaving the hut of the Mexican mustanger, there were two other horsemen in the prairie of southern western Texas. The first one had left the hotel in Fort Inge and was riding calmly, deep in thought. He had a striped serape on his shoulders. After a while, another horseman in a cloak appeared on the same road. He was in a hurry. It seemed he was trying to overtake the first one. Then he also disappeared from view. And at that very moment, a third horseman rode from Fort Inge. Like the other two, he continued to ride across the prairie. He had a short rifle under his red coat. The horseman was riding slowly, even for a traveler. From time to time, he turned around and listened. An hour later, the positions of the three travelers changed. The first horseman was entering an opening in the woods. For the first time, he showed hesitation. He stopped, and for a second or two, sat in his saddle looking at the ground before him. Then he rode into the opening. At that moment, the horseman in the cloak saw him and rode after him without hesitation. Soon the third horseman approached the opening, but instead of riding into it, as the others had done, he turned to the edge of the forest. Then he left his horse among the trees and came out into the opening on foot. Then came a sound of a rifle shot. No other sounds followed. Chapter 12. A Man Missing. The planter's family gathered in the dining room for breakfast when it was discovered that one of its members was missing. Henry was the absent one. "Where can the boy be?" asked his father for the fourth time. Louise and Calhoun said nothing. The ex-captain sat nervously in his chair. A black servant entered. "It's very strange that Henry is not here for breakfast," said the planter, for about the 10th time. "Pluto," he called the servant, "go to Henry's room. If he's there, tell him we're at breakfast." "Yes, Mr. Woodley," said the servant. "There's something strange in all this," said the planter. "If he is not there, where is he? At the fort, perhaps, with those young fellows. Not at the saloon, I hope." "Oh, no, he wouldn't go there," said Calhoun. He was puzzled by the absence of Henry, as was Poindexter himself, but he said nothing about what he had seen at night. "I hope he knows nothing about it," thought Louise. "If not, it may still remain a secret between brother and me. But why is he still absent? I hope he overtook Maurice and made it up with him." Pluto came back in the dining room. "Well," cried his master, without waiting for him to speak, "is he there?" "No, Mr. Woodley," said Pluto. "He is not there, but his horse is there." "His horse there? Not in his sleeping room, I suspect." "No, Mr. Woodley, it's at the big gate." "His horse at the gate?" "Yes, and the animal—" "Speak out, what's wrong with him? Is his tail missing?" "No, I'm afraid the old horse has lost his rider." "What? Henry thrown from his horse? Nonsense, Pluto. My son is a good rider." "Impossible." "I don't say he was thrown out of the saddle. Come to the gate, Mr. Woodley, and see for yourself." The planter, his daughter, and nephew went to the outside gate of the hacienda. Another servant stood holding Henry's horse. The animal was wet and very excited. There were dark spots over his shoulders, all of the color of blood. The planter went to Fort Inge. Calhoun, on his own horse, followed him. The news soon spread around. The Indians were out. Henry Poindexter had no enemies in all Texas. Among the horsemen, who came quickly to Fort Inge, no one doubted that the Comanches had done it. It was simply a question of how, when, and where. And where is the body? Who last saw Henry Poindexter? Oberdoffer, the hotel's owner, made his way through the crowd. He said that Maurice the mustanger had that night ridden out at a late hour. He had returned to the hotel at a still later hour and asked for his bill. Then he paid every cent of it and left. 20 minutes later, Henry Poindexter knocked at the door and asked after Mr. Maurice Gerald, and then he rode off, clearly trying to overtake the mustanger. Did anyone know where the horse hunter had his home? There were some people who believed it was somewhere on the Alamo. So it was decided to go to the Alamo to find the missing man or his dead body. Perhaps, also, to find the body of Maurice the mustanger. The search party under command of Major Ringwood tried to move slowly. There were good reasons for that. The Indians were on the warpath. In the prairie, no trail was discovered. Finally, the search party approached an opening in the woods. The trackers knew that a path to the Alamo passed through this opening, so they guided the expedition into it. After a while, one of the trackers came up to Major Ringwood. "What is it?" asked the major. "The hoof marks of 2 horses, Major." "Well, Spangler, my good fellow, what do you make of it?" "Not much," said Spangler. "Do you see that, Major?" said he, pointing to the ground. "Blood, a pool of it," said the major. "Did the Comanches do it?" "No," said the tracker. "Why do you say that, Spangler?" there are only 4 hoof marks instead of 40. You see, both horses had shoes. Comanches don't ride shod horses. One of the horses was a Mustang, the other an American horse. Spangler and Ringwood followed the hoof marks. Soon the trail ended. The horses came back. The tracker got off his horse to examine the ground. They were here together, he said, and for some time. They even had enough time to smoke a cigar. Here are the stumps. Men don't smoke in company when they want to cut each other's throats. So the quarrel had to be after the cigars were smoked out, and one of them killed the other. I'm afraid poor Mr. Poindexter will never see his son alive. Most strange, exclaimed the Major. We must follow the hoof marks of the 2 horses from the place where the blood is, said the tracker. All right, Spangler, said the Major, but say nothing about what we've seen. All right, said the tracker. Give me 10 minutes to find them, and then come on to my signal. Chapter 13. The Marked Bullet. Major Ringwood gave orders to move through the forest so that Woodley Poindexter couldn't see the blood of his son. When the search party reached a small stream, an animal jumped out of the bushes. It was a beautiful and rare creature, the jaguar. 2 people fired their guns at the same time. They were Cassius Calhoun and a young planter who was riding by his side. The jaguar dropped dead. Whose shot killed him? Mine, I'll prove, said the ex-captain. You see, gentlemen, if the bullet is mine, you'll find my initials on it, CCC. My bullets are special so that I can always tell when the trophy is mine. The bullet was taken out. It showed Calhoun had told the truth. Soon the search party arrived at the spot where the tracker had found hoof marks. There were no longer marks made by 2 horses. The ground showed only the hoof marks of 1 horse. Spangler knew it was the Mustang, but he was puzzled. The hoof marks went zigzagging, turning and circling. Perhaps there was no rider, or he was asleep in the saddle, thought the tracker. Could these be the hoof marks of a horse with a killer? Spangler didn't know what to think. What happened after that made the mystery even worse. The sun was low down when the men saw a strange shape, a horseman without a head. The eyes of all the men were turned in the same direction. Officers, planters, soldiers, trackers couldn't move in the saddles and say a word. No one even offered an explanation. Most men were so terrified that they couldn't even think. They could only see that there was a horse of a large size, with a man on his back. Nothing of color could be noticed, neither the clothes of the man nor the skin of his horse. It was just a gigantic black shape against the golden background of the setting sun. It was so strange and so absolutely unnatural. What could it mean? Was it a ghost? Surely it couldn't be human. It's the devil himself, cried one of the bravest soldiers. The headless horseman suddenly turned his horse and went straight towards the sun. The search party under command of Major Ringwood was not the only one that left Fort Inge that morning. Long before it, in fact at dawn, 4 horsemen went in the direction of the Nueces. They could not be going in search of the dead body of Henry Poindexter. At that hour no one even suspected that the young man was dead, or even that he was missing. All the horsemen were Mexicans. One of the 4 rode a better horse than any of his companions. The man was in his mid-30s. His face was handsome, but he had a cold and cruel animal eye. He was known among his friends by a name of an animal well known upon the plains of Texas, El Coyote. What made him cross the prairie at this early hour of the morning, as the leader of others, when a few hours before he was seen drunk in his hut? The sudden change of situation is not so hard to explain. Calhoun had left the door open, and in this way it remained until early morning, Cold air woke El Coyote. He found a large bottle, but it was now empty. Not a drop, he cried in angry disappointment. I must go to the saloon. If it is open, Oberdoffer'll give something to the coyote. Ha ha ha. The hotel was a few hundred yards from his hut, on the same side of the river. 20 minutes later, El Coyote was in the fort. He was lucky. Oberdoffer was already in the saloon. Mr. Diaz, said Oberdoffer to his new guest, you're early. Give me your bottle, I'll fill it for you. Here's the money, and be quick about it. Are you in a hurry? I'm afraid the Irishman'll get wild horses before you. He went off last night. He left my house late, after midnight. Mr. Maurice Gerald was a good guest. He paid his bill like a rich man. The Mexican tried not to show his interest. There are plenty of mustangs on the plains, enough for all horse hunters in Texas, he said, and walked out of the saloon. El Coyote visited 3 other houses and returned home. Only then he noticed the hoof marks near the hut. The American captain was here last night, he said. I remember something. I think he wanted to tell me about Gerald's departure. Ha ha. I don't need more instructions from him. I'm going to earn his $1,000. When I get them, I'll go back to the Rio Grande and see what can be done with Isadora. Diaz remained at his hut only long enough to eat a few pieces of meat. Then he rode to meet the 3 horsemen. He told his companions that they were going to the Alamo. I know the Alamo well, said one of them, a mustanger himself. I've hunted horses there. The nearest way to it is through an opening you see out there. You forget that we're riding shod horses. Indians don't go out from Fort Inge and then straight to the Alamo, said Diaz. Oh, true, answered the man. I didn't think about it. The 3 companions followed El Coyote in silence till they reached the forest, a few miles from the opening. The 4 men got off their horses and tied them to the trees. Chapter 14. 4 Comanches. The following morning, about a quarter of a mile from the opening, a young man in the cloak and Panama hat was lying on the ground. He was on his back, with face turned to the sky. A big tree was near, but it could not protect him from the sun. Was he dead? The man opened his eyes. Where am I? Trees above, around me, he said. Now I have it. I struck my head against a tree. My left leg hurts. Ah, it may be broken. Where is the horse? Gone off, of course. He should be in the stable of Casa del Corvo. The young man tried to get up and failed. Then he tried to rise to his feet again. He found that he could stand only on one leg. It was no use standing upon it, so he lay down again. 2 hours brought no change in his situation. It will kill me if I stay here, he said. I must try to reach water. There's a stream somewhere in this forest. I must get to it. If I have to crawl on my hands and knees. The longer I stay here, the worse it will be. The sun grows hotter. I may faint. And then, the wolves. But if I find water, all may yet be well. I remember the stream well enough. It should be southeast from here. I shall try that way. The man began making his way through the forest, crawling on his hands and knees. He often had to make stops to rest. He was about a quarter of a mile from that place when he had a new idea. What about a crutch? He said. Oh, my knife is still here. The young man drew the knife from his belt and cut down a young tree and made a rude crutch. Now he could move a little faster. It was not easy. The sun was almost in the zenith. The man was thirsty. His wounded leg caused him much pain with every step. The thorns of the bushes scratched his face, hands, and legs. Soon all his face was covered in sweat and blood. Suddenly he heard sounds of running water. It was the stream. The wounded man took his crutch again and went in its direction. It was his strength and the love of life that saved him. In the mustanger's hut, Phelim O'Neill sat down on a chair in the middle of the room and looked at Tara, his master's dog. "Where is the master, I wonder? He said he would be here by 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's now 6 in the afternoon. Something's keeping him, don't you think so, Tara?" he said. "Come, let us take a look over the big plain. If master's coming at all, we could see him." Phelim took the path through the woods and came to the top of the cliff. From that spot where he was standing, he could see the whole plain. The sun was low down on the horizon, but shining from a cloudless sky. Phelim looked in the direction in which he expected his master should appear, and stood silently watching. After a while, he saw a horseman, who was heading towards the Alamo. He was still more than a mile away, but even at that distance, the faithful servant could see that it was his master. The horseman was wearing a striped serape. It was true Navajo. Maurice Gerald was the only man in those parts who had such a serape. "It looks strange, doesn't it, Tara? It's hot enough to roast a steak on these stones, and yet the master doesn't seem to think so," said Phelim. "I hope he hasn't caught a cold in that hotel." The man watched the approaching horseman for some time. "What's that?" he cried. "He's got the serape over his head. He's playing us a trick, Tara. He wants to give you and me a surprise." "No, he has no head. Is it the master? It's too short for him. And the head, where is it? Something's clearly very wrong. What does it mean, Tara?" The dog gave a howl and rushed towards the horseman. Tara was already close when the horse suddenly turned around and galloped away across the plain. Phelim rushed down from the top of the cliff to the hut. He closed the skin door behind him and barricaded it with several large packages that lay near. But it was no use. What protection could there be in a closed door against something which was not of this world? The only thing that could give the frightening man some comfort was whiskey. At midnight, a group of men got off their horses and came up to the mustanger's hut. There were only 4 of them, all in the war costume of the Comanche. But they were not Indians, they were Mexicans, and their chief was Miguel Diaz, the mustanger, better known as El Coyote. The Mexicans spent some time by the door of the hut listening. "He's not here," said El Coyote. "Is it possible he hasn't yet got home?" "We'd better go inside and make sure," suggested one of his men. "Why not?" asked the second. "Let's have something to eat, too. I'm hungry," added the third. Diaz kicked the skin door. "It's closed," he said, "done to keep out visitors in his absence. Lions, tigers, bears, perhaps Indians, ha ha ha." He gave another kick. "No use kicking, it's barricaded with something. Something heavy, too," said the mustanger. "Doesn't matter, I'll soon see what's inside." El Coyote drew a knife from his belt and cut a large hole in the skin of the door. Then he put his hand into the hole and found the packages. The Mexicans moved the packages aside and opened the door. Then they entered the hut and saw a man in the middle of the floor. "Is he asleep?" asked one of the Mexicans. Diaz examined the man. "No, he's drunk. He's the servant of the Irishman. I saw this fellow before. His master is not at home," he said. "Ah, here's the bottle. There's enough to give us a drink." The men distributed the whiskey. "We must wait for him," said El Coyote. "He cannot be much longer now. You, Barajo, go up to the cliff. He must come that way from the Leona. The rest remain here with me. We can meet him under the big cypress tree. Barajo, as soon as you see him, come here and let us know, and be sure you give us time to get under the cypress. We may never have such a chance again." Baraho left the hut, and the other visitors sat down to play cards. Chapter 15. The Headless Horseman Again. An hour passed. Suddenly, some sound interrupted the game of the Mexicans. It was the cry of Phelim. He finally opened his eyes and saw a strange company with him in the hut. The players jumped to their feet and drew their knives from the belt. At that moment, Baraho appeared in the doorway. "He is coming, quick!" The other men rushed out of the hut to the cliff. They hid under the branches of a big cypress, waiting for the mustanger. Soon they heard the sound of hoofs, but the horseman was not yet seen in the dark. "Don't kill him," whispered Miguel Diaz to his men. "There's no need for that just yet. I want to have him alive for an hour or so. I have my reasons. Get him and his horse. There can be no danger. He'll be surprised and unprepared. If he resists, shoot him. But let me fire first." The horseman finally approached the shadow of the cypress. "Stop! To the ground!" cried El Coyote. He rushed forward and seized the reins. The other three tried to get the man in the saddle. There was no struggle at all, no shots, not even a word in protest. The horse alone protested. He moved back and drew the Mexicans after him, into the moonlight. What was that? The Mexicans let the horseman go and ran back to their own horses with loud cries. Then they hurriedly rode off. They saw something that had frightened braver people. They saw a horseman without a head. Was it a ghost? Surely it could not be human. So thought El Coyote and his terrified companions. So thought Phelim. So thought the people from the search party, who saw the headless horseman as well. "What do you make of it, gentlemen?" asked Major Ringwood. "An Indian trick?" suggested one of the officers. "I don't think it's Indian," said the major. "I don't know what to think. What's your opinion, Spangler?" The tracker shook his head. "I don't know. It must either be a man or a dummy," he said. "That's it, a dummy!" cried several people. "Whatever it is, man, dummy, or devil," said one officer, "there's no reason why we shouldn't be frightened to follow his trail. Has it left any trail, I wonder?" "If he has," replied Spangler, "we'll soon see. Shall we move forward, Major?" "Yes, of course," said the major. By that time the sun had disappeared over the horizon, so it was decided to continue the search in the morning. But soon a horseman arrived with a letter for the major. It was from the commanding officer of the district. The letter said that the Comanches had killed men, women, and children in a village close to the town of San Antonio. The commanding officer ordered the major to bring his people to take part in the operation against the Comanches. A small group of people was left with Spangler to follow the trail of the American horse. The rest returned to the fort with the dragoons. Woodley Poindexter and older men decided to go back to their homes too, so that they could start a new search the following morning. Before the departure, the major told Poindexter and his friends about the pool of blood and other facts. He also told them about his ideas about the murder. The major liked the young mustanger, and he didn't believe in his guilt, but all the facts were against him. With the planter and his friends, it was no longer a suspicion. The Indians were out of the question, so men called Maurice Gerald a murderer. The group, left with Spangler, remained on the spot which the major had chosen for a camp. The group was small, no more than 10 people. They were young men, sons of planters. Calhoun was there as well. Instead of going to sleep, the men gathered around a fire. They were in low spirits, and it was easily explained. The Headless Horseman was fresh in their thoughts. They were still under the influence of fear. Calhoun looked more frightened than the rest of the group. He was sitting under the shadow of the trees, at some distance from the fire. He hadn't said a word since the departure of the dragoons. There was still the same wild look in his eyes. "I say, Cash Calhoun," cried one of the young fellows by the fire, who was already under the influence of whiskey. "Come up, old fellow, and join us in a drink. We all respect your sorrow. We'll do what we can to get satisfaction for you and yours. But a man mustn't always be as sad as you are now. Come along. Whiskey'll do you a lot of good, I promise." Calhoun accepted the invitation and came up to the fire. From that moment he changed. Instead of being sad, he became too cheerful. It was strange to see it in a man whose cousin had been murdered that very morning. An invited guest soon became the host of the party. He brought many bottles of whiskey from his saddlebags. The young planters talked, sang, and even danced until the alcohol could no longer keep them awake. Then, tired, they fell asleep. The ex-officer of volunteers was the last to lie down, and he was the first to get up. He quietly went to his horse and rode noiselessly away. "Thank God there's a clear moon, and 6 good hours before those boys think of getting up. I'll have time to search every corner for a couple of miles around the place. If the body is there, I'll find it," he said, as he rode through the forest. But what could that thing mean? They all saw it, every one of them. What was it? He arrived at the opening already described. He was about to turn into it, when he saw that he was not the only horseman there. Long before Calhoun knew it, he saw that the rider was headless. There could be no mistake about that. It couldn't be an illusion of the moon's light. Calhoun had seen that same shape in the light of the setting sun. More still, he recognized the horse, the striped serape on the shoulders of the rider. All these belonged to Maurice the mustanger. Calhoun had enough time to see these details. He was so frightened that he couldn't move. His own horse clearly shared the feeling. It was only after the horse of the strange rider turned back that Calhoun could move again. "Good God," he cried. "What does it mean? Is it man or demon? Has this whole day been a dream? Or am I mad?" Calhoun turned his horse and rode back by the way he had come. He came up to the fire and lay down among his companions, not to sleep, but to stay trembling. Chapter 16. A Secret. At dawn, the courtyard of Casa del Corvo was already crowded with armed men. They carried long hunting rifles, all types of guns, knives, and even tomahawks. They were ready to continue the search for Poindexter's missing son. Some of the men had been out on the day before, along with the dragoons. Others had now joined the rest. There was one part of the crowd that could even be called an organization. These were regulators. There was nothing special about them in their clothes or guns, but they knew one another, and they talked about the murder of Henry Poindexter by Maurice the mustanger. There was one more subject of discussion. Those who had seen the Headless Horseman were telling those who had not about the horrible sight. Of course, they tried to find an explanation. Finally, a good explanation was found, that the horse was real enough, but the rider was a dummy. All those people were ready to go. They were only waiting for Woodley Poindexter to give them the signal. The planter still hoped to get a guide. He needed someone who could take them to the Alamo, the house of Maurice the mustanger. There was only one man who could do this, old Zeb Stump. But Zeb could not be found. He was away, hunting, so the searchers decided to leave without him. They had already left Casa del Corvo when Zeb Stump came to the hacienda. The old hunter was surprised to find the gate closed. "Oh, Pluto, why is the big gate closed in the middle of breakfast time?" he asked the black servant. "What's wrong? Nothing's happened to Miss Louise, I hope." "No, nothing's happened to Miss Louise. Bad enough without it," answered Pluto. "Young Miss is inside the house. Come in, Mr. Stump. She'll tell you the news herself." "Your master's at home too, isn't he?" "No, he left a quarter of an hour ago. He's off to the prairies, where there was a big hunt about a month ago." "Why did he go there? Who's with him?" "Oh, that's Mr. Calhoun, and many other white gentlemen." "And young Mr. Henry? Has he gone too?" "Oh, Mr. Stump, that's the trouble. Mr. Henry's gone too. I mean, Mr. Henry's dead." "Dead? Are you joking?" "Oh, that's true. They've gone in search for his body." "Mr. Stump, come this way, please," said Louise, coming out to meet him. "It is too true what Pluto has been telling you. My brother is missing. He hasn't been seen since the night before last. His horse came home, with spots of blood on his skin." "Sure enough, that's bad news. He rode out somewhere and the horse came back without him. As they are still searching, I might be able to help. Please tell me about it in detail." Louise told Zeb what she knew. The only thing she kept back was the garden scene. Then she told Zeb about the suspicion that Maurice was the murderer. "It's a lie," cried the hunter. "It's impossible. The Mustanger's not the man to do such a thing. Of course he hated your cousin Cash. And who doesn't, I'd like to know? Excuse me for saying it. As for Henry, it's different. There's never been a quarrel between them." "No," cried the girl. "It was all over. Henry said so. And Maurice." She covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. "Oh, there has been something," asked Zeb. "Did you say, Miss Louise, there was a quarrel between your brother and—" "Dear Zeb," cried Louise, "promise me that you'll keep my secret. Promise it. As a friend. As a good and brave man. You will you?" The hunter gave her the promise. 5 minutes later he knew the girl's secret, but he showed almost no surprise. "I thought it would come to something like that, especially after that chase across the prairie," he said. "Miss Louise, Zeb Stump doesn't see anything wrong in all that. Women will be women all over the world, on the prairies or off them. The Mustanger is a good and honest man. And for what you told me, what proof has been found? Only the horse coming home with some red spots on the skin. Oh, there is more. The people were all out yesterday. They followed a trail and saw something. They didn't tell me what. They've gone off again." "But the Mustanger? What does he say?" "Oh, I thought you knew. He hasn't been found either. He too may be killed." "If he's alive, he should be in his hut. Why didn't they go there?" "Ah, I see. Nobody knows where he lives. Have they gone that way again?" "They have. I heard some of them say so. There are many rough men along with father. There are some of those called regulators. As they went away, I heard them use wild words. If they find him, and he can't prove his innocence, who knows what may be done to him? Dear Zeb, go to his hut, please. Reach the Alamo before them, and warn him about the danger." "There's some truth in what you say," said the hunter, preparing to move off. "There's some danger for the young fellow. I'll do what I can to help him. I'm sure the Mustanger's innocent." Chapter 17. Isadora. El Coyote and his 3 companions had no wish to return to the hut of Maurice Gerald. All 4 knew that it was the Irishman. There was his horse known to them, his Navajo serape, and his black sombrero. There was even the dog which Diaz remembered to be his. They rode across the prairie as fast as their horses could carry them. After a while, they arrived at the place where they had transformed themselves into Comanches. They washed the war paint from their skins, found their usual clothes, put them on, and rode towards the Leona. "Not much chance of sleeping after that," said El Coyote, as he stepped into his own hut. "What was it? It couldn't be a ghost. I felt a body. Ah, it could be a trick. That, and that only, can be the explanation. Fools, frightened at a dummy. Tomorrow I'll go back to the Alamo. I'll get those $1,000, and if I find out that Isadora still loves me, I'll destroy not only the man I hate, but the woman I love." These thoughts made Diaz feel better, and he soon fell asleep. He woke up in the morning and saw a visitor. "Jose," he cried out in surprise. "Glad to see you, good Jose. Is Isadora here? On the Leona, I mean?" "Yes, Mr. Diaz," said the visitor. "So soon again. She was here 2 weeks ago, wasn't she? I was expecting to hear from you, good Jose. Why didn't you write?" "Oh, Mr. Diaz, there was no man I could trust. I have something to tell you. Something, I'm sorry to say. You won't thank me for telling you. But my life is yours, and I promised you should know all." "About her and him? Your mistress has met him." "No, she hasn't." "What then?" asked Diaz. "That's why I've come to see you now. I'm on my way to the fort with her letter." "Ah, her letter?" "Yes, here it is, Mr. Diaz." With a shaking hand, Diaz took the paper and read. "Dear friend, I am once more here staying with Uncle Silvio. I could no longer live without hearing from you. Tell me if you are all right. I want to look into your eyes. Those eyes are so beautiful, to make sure you are in good health again. In half an hour, I shall be on the top of the hill, above my uncle's house. Come, sir, come. Isadora Covarubio de los Llanos." "Ha! Her invitation shall be answered, though not by him," cried the angry Diaz. "The man to whom it is addressed isn't any longer in the fort, or anywhere about here. God knows where he is. There's some mystery about it, no matter. Here's $1 to get you a drink at the saloon." As soon as Jose left, Diaz set the saddle upon his horse, jumped into it, and rode off in the opposite direction. The sun had just risen above the prairie horizon. Isadora Covarubio de los Llanos was riding alone up the hill, above the Leona River, not far from the hacienda of her uncle, Silvio Martinez. She was young, about 20. She was, no doubt, a very beautiful girl, but her beauty was more like that of the jaguar. In her face there was no sign of fear, only determination and courage. Isadora was fond of riding horses. Every time she rode out, she took a light lasso with her. She knew how to use it. She could throw it with the skill of a mustanger. Isadora rode into the opening in the forest. Near its center she stopped. "I am too early," she said, drawing a gold watch from her pocket. "If, indeed, I should expect him at all. Am I trembling? Is it fear? It's strange, though, to fear the man I love, the only one I have ever loved. I didn't love Miguel. It was a girl's silly fancy. He is a coward. My romantic dream was gone when I discovered that. I hate him now. Can it be true that he's become a robber? It's strange that I fear not him, but the man I love. No, there is nothing strange in it. I tremble not from any thought of danger, only the danger of not being loved. I've never told him about my love, but I must do it. Uncertainty for me is much worse. Ah, a horse is coming down the road. Is it his?" Isidora recognized the horseman who came galloping into the opening. It was Miguel Diaz, not Maurice Gerald. Isidora felt deep disappointment. "What are you doing in this lonely place, my beautiful Isidora?" asked El Coyote. "In what way can it concern you, Mr. Diaz?" asked Isidora. "What an absurd question! You know it can and does, and you know the reason why. You know how madly I love you, and you used to love me. You were mistaken, Mr. Diaz. I never told you I loved you. You are an excellent horseman, and I admired that. But it was 3 years ago. I was a girl then. I am now a woman. All that has changed. My life's changed too. I had my own hacienda, and am now only a hunter of horses. What of that? A poor mustanger has as many chances in your eyes as the owner of 100 horses." "What do you mean, Mr. Diaz?" "This pretty letter from Isidoro Covarrubio de los Llanos to one mustanger." "How did you get it?" she asked in an angry tone. "It doesn't matter. This letter says that you love him. You want to look into his beautiful eyes, but you will never see them again." "What does it mean, Mr. Diaz?" "If I have lost you, my lady, no other man will call you his. I've made up my mind about that." "Are you joking, Mr. Diaz?" "Not at all, my lovely Isidora." During the early part of the dialogue, the girl didn't stop to look in the direction where she had hoped to see Maurice. Then this hope disappeared. She realized that her letter had not reached the mustanger. She saw she was in danger. Miguel Diaz was a coward, but he had a cold, cruel determination in his eyes. It was possible for her to turn round and ride off, but it was also possible for her to be killed then. El Coyote's gun was as near to his hand as his knife. Isidora didn't even show her fear. "Nonsense!" she exclaimed. "You want to frighten me. Ha ha! Why should I fear you? I can ride and throw my lasso as well as you. Look at this." With a smile, she took the lasso from her saddle. Diaz was so puzzled by her movements that he didn't see what was coming. When he felt the lasso closing around his elbows, it was too late to do something. Then Isidora jerked him out of his saddle and threw him to the ground. "Now, Miguel Diaz," she cried, "I don't like threats. You wanted to kill me. I saw it in your eyes. There's not much chance you can overtake me before I can reach home. Goodbye, Mr. Diaz." Isidora drew a small, sharp knife, cut the rope, and rode off, leaving Diaz upon the ground, still in the loop of the lasso. Chapter 18. Unexpected Help. The sun was up when Louise Poindexter decided to go for a walk in the garden. She was about to go downstairs when she heard voices. 2 people were talking on the roof. They were her maid, Florinde, and Pluto, the servant. "Ho, look, Florinde, did you see the man on horseback? That's Maurice Gerald. The same man we met on the Black Prairies. The same that gave Miss Louise the spotted horse. The same they've all gone to search for. But they've gone the wrong way. They won't find him on the prairies today." "Oh, Pluto, aren't you glad?" said the maid. "I'm sure he's innocent. That brave, handsome young gentleman." Louise made her way towards the roof. The beating of her heart was almost as loud as her footsteps. "What have you seen that you talk so loudly?" she said. "Oh, Miss Louise, look over there. The young fellow they're searching for." "I see no one." "He's just gone in among the trees. Look. Do you see his black hat and velveteen jacket with silver buttons?" "You may be mistaken. There are many here who dress like him. Never mind. You, Pluto, I'm going out for a ride. Put the saddle on Luna, quick." In 10 minutes' time, Louise was across the river entering the forest where the horseman had disappeared. Suddenly she heard voices of a man and woman. She rode nearer, listened again. Then the man's voice was no longer heard. The woman's voice sounded angry. Then there was silence, and the sound of hoofs. Louise knew the voices had come out of the opening. When she reached it, she saw a man in a Mexican costume lying on the ground. A saddled horse was walking nearby. The man had a lasso looped around his arms. He looked dead. It was the same man she had seen from the roof, and he was not Maurice Gerald. He was clearly a Mexican. Louise slipped out of the saddle and came up to the stranger. "He doesn't seem to be dead. Is he breathing?" she said, and released him from the lasso. "Now he can breathe more freely. Ah, he's coming to. You will be able to explain everything." "Who are you?" asked Miguel Diaz, raising his head. "Where is she?" "I haven't seen anyone here, sir, but I heard a woman's voice as I rode up." "I'd rather say a devil's voice. I'm sure that Isidora Cavarubio de los Llanos is a devil." "Was it she who did this?" "Yes, thank you for releasing me from this lasso. You've been very kind to me. Can you help me into the saddle? I mustn't stay here. I have enemies not far off. You will not refuse to help me, will you?" "Why should I?" said Louise. She helped the horseman get into his saddle. "I don't know who you are. I see you are not one of our people," he said, "but you are as kind as you are beautiful, and Miguel Diaz will always remember what you've done for him." The Mexican rode off. Louise picked up a sheet of paper left by Diaz. She read what was written on it. It was Isidora's letter to Maurice Gerald. When Louise Poindexter rode off, there was an expression of deep despair on her face. It was nearly noon when Phelim woke up. A bucket of cold water made him jump. It was Zeb Stump who gave him the shower. The old hunter had taken the shortest road from Casa del Corvo to the Alamo. From what Louise Poindexter had told him, he knew that Maurice Gerald was in danger. He rode straight across the prairie because he needed to reach the Mustanger's hut before the regulators. Zeb entered the forest by the path which on the day before had been taken by Diaz and his 3 companions. After a while, he arrived at the spot he needed. He came up to the hut. The skin door was closed, but there was a large hole in the middle of it. What was the meaning of that? The old hunter listened. He heard a loud snore. Zeb looked into the hole on the skin door. The sleeper was Phelim. The hunter rose to his feet and entered the hut by the door. "Phelim! Phelim!" Phelim made no reply. "Phelim, I say! Phelim!" Still no reply. Zeb shook the Irishman. Still no reply. At that moment the old hunter noticed a bucket of water in a corner of the hut. Zeb took up the bucket and poured the water on the sleeper. A few minutes later the 2 men could start a serious conversation. Phelim was only too glad to see Zeb Stump. He was still under the influence of his fears. He told the hunter in detail about strange things he had seen. It was the first time when Zeb Stump had heard of the Headless Horseman. At first Zeb called the idea of a man without a head a fantasy of Phelim's brain. "How could I be mistaken?" asked the Irishman. "Didn't I see Mr. Maurice as I see you now? Besides, there was his serape and the saddle. And haven't I told you that Tara went away after him? And then I heard her voice just before the Indians." "Indians!" exclaimed the hunter. "Indians playing with Spanish cards? Do you think they weren't Indians after all?" "Never mind what I think. Go on. Tell me all you know about it." Chapter 19. Just in Time. The old hunter was lost in thought and he didn't see Maurice's dog as it ran up to the hut. A shout of surprise attracted his attention. "What is it, Phelim? What's wrong?" "Oh, Mr. Stump, look at Tara. There's something tied around his neck. It wasn't there when he left. What do you think it is?" The hunter looked at the dog. Sure enough, there was something around the animal's neck. A card. There was a name on the card, and some more words, in what looked like red ink. But it was blood. Zeb Stump read the words on the card. "He's alive, Phelim," he cried. "Look at this." "Oh, you can't read." "It doesn't matter, he's alive." "Who, Mr. Maurice?" "Yes, get a blanket and a couple of straps. You can do it while I catch the old mare. Quick, half an hour lost, and we may be too late." These were the last words of the hunter, as he hurried away from the hut. Zeb Stump was right. The man who had asked him for help was in grave danger. It was Maurice Gerald, of course. He had reached the stream and had finally fallen asleep. The pain of his wounds, once more returning, woke him. To go away from the spot was simply impossible. Any movement gave him pain. There was no alternative but to stay where he was. Ah, what was that sound? The mustanger heard little feet on the sand and excited breathing. "The coyotes," he said. The smell of blood had made them mad. The mustanger knew they would attack him. He had no weapon but a knife. His rifle and guns had been carried off by his horse. He drew the knife and prepared to defend himself. 4 or 5 wolves attacked the wounded man. The mustanger shook them off, striking out with his knife. Some of the coyotes went away, but new ones appeared. Suddenly the wounded man heard the sound of hoofs, followed by the loud barking of a dog. He called for help, but the horseman didn't hear him. The horse, or horseman, passed on, but the dog, it was Tara, broke through the bushes and rushed at the coyotes. It attacked 2 of the wolves. A third one could be attacked, but the frightened coyotes ran away. The man had no strength left. He drew the cloak over his face to cover it from the sun, and then he fell asleep. The dog lay down at his feet. A few hours later the mustanger woke up. His faithful dog had saved his life, and would still protect him against the attacks of coyotes. But it couldn't get him from the spot, and to stay there would be to die of hunger and of the wounds. "But Tara may take a message to the hut," he said. "Come here, old fellow. I want you to play postman for me." Maurice found a card in his pocket. No pencil. He could do without it. He broke a thorn off the closest bush and wrote something with the blood of a coyote. Then he tied the card to the neck of the dog and made it go to the hut. After a while, the mustanger was surrounded by the coyotes again. This time Maurice had a plan. He took off his cloak and cut a few holes with his knife. Then he tore up his scarf in 2 parts and used them to tie the cloak to a tree, making a hammock. The mustanger climbed into the hammock. He thought there he was no longer in danger. There was danger, however, which he had not seen. Very soon he realized he hadn't taken with him enough water. He could not return to the stream now. That would be certain death. It was a torture for the wounded man to see the fresh water of the stream and be unable to reach it. Suddenly he saw the coyotes get to their feet and rush off. What made them leave? The mustanger turned on his knee and looked around. There were no coyotes. He listened. No sounds. Maurice got out of the hammock and reached the stream. He once more looked around him and felt danger. He noticed the spotted yellow skin among the leaves. It was the jaguar. It was that dangerous animal that had made the coyotes go away. Now its eyes were on the wounded man. It was ready to attack Maurice. To get back to the hammock would be useless. The jaguar can climb like a cat. The mustanger knew this. In despair, he rushed into the stream, until he stood up to his knees in the water. He had nothing to defend himself with. No knife, no gun, not even his crutch. Those were the last thoughts of that day that remained in Maurice's memory. He didn't hear the shot which killed the jaguar. He didn't see his faithful dog and 2 men who had come to help him. Chapter 20. A Shot at the Devil. Zeb Stump carried the unconscious man to the bank of the stream. "He's fainted," he said to Phelim, examining the mustanger, "but I see no serious wounds. The leg isn't broken. Ho, ho, the young man's been attacked by coyotes." Phelim was so happy to see his master alive that he started dancing in excitement. Zeb paid no attention to his actions. He began examining Maurice's things. He had already noticed the Panama hat. "It's strange," he thought. He knew that the young Irishman always wore a Mexican sombrero. Then Zeb thought he had seen that hat before, and on some other head. He looked inside the hat and read, "Henry Poindexter." After that he examined the cloak. It, too, belonged to the same owner. "Strange, all this," said the hunter. "Something's terribly wrong. But it's no use asking Maurice. No one knows when he is going to be all right again. We must get him to the hut. That leg looks worse and worse." Zeb and Phelim cut a couple of trees and made a stretcher. Then they carried Maurice Gerald to his home. It was already night when the group arrived at the hut. The mustanger was still unconscious. He had developed a fever. Phelim went to sleep, and the hunter stayed with his friend. He sat listening to Maurice's words. He was not surprised to hear the name Louise, but there was another name he heard as well. It was the name of Louise's brother. In the morning, Zeb Stump knew that Henry Poindexter was dead. Isadora was already near the hacienda of her uncle Silvio Martinez when she thought, "I'd better release Diaz. Let him live. He's a scoundrel, but I'm not afraid of him. After what's happened, he will not come near me again." The girl headed her horse for the hill again. After a while, she arrived at the opening where she'd left Miguel Diaz, but she saw no Miguel Diaz there. No man of any kind. The letter she'd lost wasn't there any more. Isadora was about to go to the hacienda when she saw her servant Jose. "What did you do with me letter, Jose?" she asked. "I left it at the hotel, my lady," said the servant, turning pale. "Mr. Gerald had gone out." "Liar! You gave it to Miguel Diaz. I've seen it." "I'm so sorry. Please, I am not guilty. How much did Mr. Diaz pay you for your treason?" "It was not treason, my lady. He forced it from me, by blows. I was not paid." "You will be then. Take that, and that, and that." She repeated the words at least 10 times, lashing him with her horsewhip. "Now go away. I don't want to see you any more." The servant ran away, only too happy to hide in the woods. Isadora rode back to the Hacienda Martinez. When she arrived there, she heard the latest news. The son of the American planter had been murdered by Maurice the mustanger. The next morning, Isadora headed her horse to the banks of the Alamo. All night long the hunter sat at bedside of the wounded mustanger. He went out only once, that was near morning, when he heard Tara's howl. Zeb looked at the open lawn, then under the shadow of the trees. There was nothing there, except what should be. He raised his eyes to the cliff. There was nothing to be seen there. But there was something to be heard. As Zeb stood listening, there came a sound from the top of the cliff. It was the clatter of a horse's shoes. After a while he saw the horse. There was a man on its back, but only from the saddle to the shoulders. Above, there was nothing. No head. Zeb Stump rubbed his eyes and looked again. He saw the same, the horseman without a head. He stood watching the horseman until he disappeared behind the trees. The Irishman was right after all, he said in a very low voice. He saw something, and I saw it myself. What can it be? Why not get closer to it? The hunter went through the trees along the path that led up to the cliff. He had taken the rifle with him when he heard the howl of the dog. A few minutes later, Zeb saw the horseman again and stopped. He was frightened, but eager to discover what that was, a man or the devil. "Hello, stranger. You're out for a late ride, aren't you? Haven't you forgot to take your head with you?" he cried. There was no reply. "Look here, stranger. Old Zeb Stump from Kentucky is speaking to you. Explain your game. Speak before you get a bullet." No reply. 6 seconds more. I give you 6 more seconds. If you don't speak by that time, I'll shoot, shouted the hunter. If you're a dummy or the devil, it won't do you any harm. But if you're a man, you deserve to be shot for such a trick. Speak. You won't? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then came a shot. It frightened the horse, but the rider was still in the saddle. The animal went off at a gallop. Zeb Stump was not only surprised at the result, he was terrified. He was sure that his bullet had passed through the man's heart. "It's not a man. It's the devil," he whispered. Chapter 21. The Rivals in Love. Zeb Stump was still near the cliff when Phelim woke up. Several minutes later he heard the sound of hoofs. Someone was approaching the hut. He couldn't see the horseman because of the thick trees. Was it the Headless Horseman again? His first impulse was to rush across the lawn. But at that moment the horseman rode out from among the trees. That horseman had a head. A real head, and a pretty face on it. "But this young fellow looks as if he's just buried his grandmother," said Phelim. "Oh, he's a woman." It was a woman. It was Isadora. Phelim was right. She looked worried. "Is Mr. Gerald at home?" she asked. "I wish to see him." "Do you? Perhaps you'll have to wait. The master isn't in a condition to receive visitors, especially pretty ladies." "I must see him. I must." "I will. I shall." Isadora slipped out of the saddle and went in the direction of the door. But there was somebody else who was protecting his master. It was Tara. The dog was standing directly in front of Phelim in the door. Isadora made no more moves. Surprise was, for the time, the only feeling she had. At that moment a tall man with a rifle came from behind the trees. "You haven't lost your way, have you, miss?" he asked Isadora. "No, sir," she said. "In that case, you know where you are." "Yes, this is the house of Mr. Gerald, isn't it?" "That's not much of a house, I'm afraid. Perhaps you want to see the master of it." "Oh, yes, sir, that's why I am here." "Well, no objection to that, but it's no use talking to him now. He wouldn't know you." "Is he ill?" "He's wounded a bit," said Zeb, "and he's got fever." "But are you sure, sir, that his wounds aren't dangerous?" asked Isadora. "I don't think so. In a week's time he'll be on his feet again." "What happened to him? The Indians? Has there been a quarrel with anyone?" "I know there's been a quarrel with coyotes, miss, but what happened before that is a mystery to me. He can't talk yet. We must wait until he does." "Can I see him now? I am his friend." "Why not? You can look after him till we get back. Come along, Phelim. Let's take a short walk," said the old hunter. Phelim followed him at once. "This is the same girl who sent him baskets to the hotel," thought Zeb Stump. "She's clearly in love with him. So is the other. But it's also clear that he's thinking about the other, not about her. Poor thing. She isn't a bad girl, but the Irishman can't belong to both." Isadora entered the hut and came up to the wounded man. She kissed his unconscious lips, and then started back. What made her do it? It was a name, but not her own. The day Louise Poindexter released Miguel Diaz from the lasso was, perhaps, the darkest day of her life. She was worried about her brother and the man she loved. When she read Isadora's letter, she felt jealousy and despair. Why should this woman write to him like this? Maurice said she was just a friend, but this was not the letter of a friend. "Ah, me," she told herself. "I see it all now. She's in love with Maurice. But is he in love with her too?" After long unhappy hours, Louise's thoughts became more rational. She reread the letter. There was still the hope that Maurice had gone away as he promised. In the morning she finally made a decision. She would ride to the Alamo alone. There was no one to stop her. The planter and other searchers had not yet returned. Louise needed to find the truth, no matter how hard it was. She needed to find proof to destroy her jealousy, or confirm it. Proof stronger than this letter. The first hour of sunrise saw her in the saddle riding from Casa del Corvo, across the prairie already known to her. It was 20 miles from the hacienda to the mustanger's hut. It took Louise 2 hours to get there. As soon as the girl entered the hut, she saw the proof she had been so afraid of. There was a woman in the hut. Isadora turned to the door and saw the woman whose name the mustanger had just said for the 100th time, Louise. Louise saw before her the writer of that letter, the writer who had praised his eyes, the writer who had asked Maurice to come and meet her, the writer who was now by his side. These thoughts were too painful for the girl. Isadora felt the same. She already knew that Maurice didn't love her, and on the doorstep was her rival. Face to face with flashing eyes, the two women stood looking at each other. Both were in love with the same man. Both were jealous. Both were beside the man they loved, but he didn't know about their presence. This scene lasted only a few seconds. It was Louise Poindexter who stopped it. She turned and went to her horse. The hut of Maurice Gerald was no place for her. Isadora came out too. The same thought was in her heart. The hut of Maurice Gerald was no place for her. The gray horse stood nearest. The mustang was farther out. Isadora was the first to get into the saddle, the first to move off. As she passed, her rival had also got into the saddle and was holding the reins. The rivals exchanged glances again. Louise's glance was a strange mixture of sadness and surprise. The last look of Isadora was full of anger and hatred. Chapter 22, Revenge. Isadora reached the top of the hill and stopped under a big cypress. There were thoughts in her heart darker than the shadow of the tree. Shall I go back and kill her? It couldn't win me back his heart. It's lost. Lost without hope. Oh, there is no hope for me. Not only she, he also, both must die. But not yet. Not until he can feel his punishment and know where it comes from. Suddenly Isadora noticed a large group of horsemen on the open prairie. The Indians? No, white men. Robbers? No, too well dressed for them. They must be the searchers about whom I've heard, led by the father of— Yes, it's them. Here is a perfect chance of revenge. Isadora stopped, waiting for the men to approach. Minutes later she was surrounded by armed horsemen, but the girl was not afraid of them. She knew some of the men by sight. An elderly man approached Isadora. Instinct told her that he was the father of the murdered man, and of the woman she hated. Oh, what an opportunity! "Tell me, miss, have you seen anybody out here?" asked Woodley Poindexter. Isadora hesitated. The planter politely asked her another question. "May I ask where you live?" "On the Rio Grande, sir." "Have you come directly from there?" "No, from the Leona." "From the Leona?" "It's the niece of old Martinez," said one of the men. "His plantation joins yours, Mr. Poindexter." "Yes, I'm the niece of Silvio Martinez." "Then you've come from his place, have you? I'm sorry to ask you such questions, miss. We have serious reasons." "Yes, I've come from the Hacienda Martinez," answered Isadora. "I left my uncle's house 2 hours ago." "Then no doubt you know that there has been a murder." "Yes, sir, I heard about it yesterday, at Uncle Silvio's." "But today, when you left, was there any fresh news? Have you heard anything, miss?" "That people had gone after the murderer." "Your people, sir?" Yes. It meant us, no doubt. Have you met or seen anyone, miss, out here?" "Yes, I have." "You have? What sort of person? Can you describe him?" "A lady." "What sort of lady?" "American." "An American lady? Out here? Alone?" "Yes, sir." "Who?" "I don't know." "You don't know her? What was she like? How was she dressed?" "In a riding habit." "She was on horseback, then?" "On horseback." "Where did you meet this lady?" "Not far from here, on the other side of the forest." "Which way was she going? Is there any house on the other side?" "A hut. I only know about that." "To whom does it belong, this hut?" "Maurice the mustanger." These words caused excitement in the crowd. After 2 days of search, they have found the trail of the murderer. "We don't wish to be rude, Miss Martinez, if that is your name, but you must guide us to this place." "It takes me a little out of my way, though not far." "Come on, gentlemen, I'll show you if you want to go there." Isadora rode through the forest again. This time she was followed by the 100 horsemen. She stopped on the western edge of the forest. "There," she said, pointing over the plain. "Do you see that black spot on the horizon? It is the top of a cypress. Its roots are in the lower bank of the Alamo. Go there. There is a path leading down the cliff. You will find below the hut I've told you about." The searchers were too excited to stay for further directions. They forgot at once the woman who had given them. The whole crowd rushed across the plain, heading straight for the cypress. There was only one of the men who didn't move. Not the leader, but a man very interested in the lady seen by Isadora. "Tell me, miss," he said, bringing his horse alongside hers, "did you notice this lady's horse?" "Certainly, sir." "The color?" "A spotted mustang." "A spotted mustang. Good God!" exclaimed Cassius Calhoun, and he went at a gallop after the searchers. Isadora realized that there was one other person who hoped to get revenge as much as she did. Chapter 23. In the Hut. Louise Poindexter had climbed into the saddle, but something made her stay. Why did she leave, she thought? Why that look of hatred? Instead of going away, Louise Poindexter once more slipped out of her saddle and entered the hut again. The girl saw the pale cheeks and wild eyes of the man she loved, and that made her forget about her anger and sadness. "Maurice," Wounded. Dying, she cried, running up to the bed. Maurice, who has done this? There was no reply. Maurice, Maurice, speak to me. Do you not know me, Louise? Ah, Louise, you are very beautiful. Louise, 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 whispered the mustanger. I love you with all my heart, my angel. And he closed his eyes again. Louise was very happy to hear those words. At that moment, a man came through the doorway. It was Phelim. He was surprised to see another woman in the hut. I must be dreaming, he exclaimed, opening his eyes wide. I must be dreaming. It can't be you, Miss Poindexter. But it is, Mr. O'Neill. It's bad you've forgotten me so soon. Forgotten you? You needn't accuse me of doing something which is impossible, miss. Who can forget your sweet face? There's a man here who can't forget it, even in his dreams, said Phelim. But what does it all mean? Didn't you see a woman here, Miss Poindexter? Yes, yes. Oh, you did. And where is she now? Gone away, I think. Gone away? She didn't stay long. It's very strange. Indeed. Oh, it is strange. Very strange, said Louise. Dear Phelim, tell me all that has happened. Then you'll have to stay here longer. It would take a lot of time to describe the strange things which have happened since the day before yesterday. Has anybody else been to this place? Ah, plenty of people. All sorts. And colors, too. First and foremost, there was somebody, though he didn't get all the way to the hut. But I can't tell you about him. It may frighten you, miss. Tell me, I'm not afraid. It was a man on horseback, without a head. Without a head? And what's more, miss, he was like Mr. Maurice himself, with his horse under him, and his Mexican serape, and everything just as the young master looks. I was so scared when I saw him. But where did you see this, Mr. O'Neill? Up there, on the top of the cliff. I'm sure it was a trick. A trick, miss? That's just what old Zeb said. He has been here, then? Yes, but after the others. The others? Yes, miss. Zeb arrived only yesterday in the morning. The others came here the night before. But who? What others? The Indians. There was a whole tribe of them. Oh, what's that? What? Didn't you hear something? There it is again. The horses. Many horses. They're just outside. Phelim rushed towards the door. The place is surrounded by men on horseback. There's 1,000 of them. I must find old Zeb. Oh, I'll be too late. Phelim ran out of the hut. It's them, cried Louise. My father, and I am here. How shall I explain it? She saw the opening in the skin door. Should she get away through that? It was no longer possible. There were horsemen behind the hut. Besides, her own mare was in front. But there was another thought that made her stay. It was more noble. He was in danger. Who could protect him? And she sat down on a chair beside the hero of her heart. Woodley Poindexter rode up to the hut and saw the spotted mare. "Oh, what's this?" he said. "Why, it's Louise's Mustang." "It is, uncle," answered Cassius Calhoun, who had ridden up along with him. "I wonder who's brought it here." "Louise herself, I think." "Nonsense! Are you joking, Cash?" "No, uncle, I'm not." "You mean to say my daughter has been here?" "Has been. Still is, I think." "Impossible." "Look there, then." The door has just been opened. A woman could be seen inside the hut. "It is my daughter." Poindexter got down from his horse and went into the hut. Calhoun followed him. "Louise, what does it mean? A wounded man. Is it Henry?" At that moment the planter saw the cloak and hat. Henry's. "It is, he's alive." He came up to the bed. The pale face on the pillow was not that of his son. Louise's father started back with a groan. Calhoun seemed shocked even more than Poindexter. He looked at the mustanger in horror and ran out of the hut. "What is it?" asked the planter. "Can you explain it, Louise?" "I can't, Father. I came here only a few minutes ago. I found him as you see. He's got a fever. And Henry?" "I don't know. Mr. Gerald was alone when I entered. His servant was absent and has just returned. I haven't had time to ask him a question." "But how did you come here?" "I couldn't stay at home any longer. It was terrible, alone, with no one at the house. And I thought I could find Henry here." "Here? But how did you know about this place? Who guided you? You are by yourself." "Oh, Father, I knew the way. Do you remember the day of the picnic, when the Mustang ran away with me? Mr. Gerald then told me he lived here. I thought I could find the way back." "You've done a strange thing, my daughter, and dangerous. You have acted like a silly girl. Come away. This isn't a good place for a lady. For you. Get to your horse and ride home again. Someone will go with you. You shouldn't see what may happen here. Come." The father took the daughter to her horse. "Louise, Mr. Yancey will ride home with you," he said. The young planter thanked Poindexter for the opportunity in his soul. "But, Father," protested the young lady, "why shouldn't I wait for you? You are not going to stay here long." "It is my wish, daughter. Please do as I tell you." Louise and the young planter rode off. Chapter 24. A Jury of Regulators. Louise Poindexter and the young planter were riding through the trees when the girl suddenly stopped. "Mr. Yancey," said the girl, after a short pause, "something's wrong with my saddle. I can't sit comfortably in it. Can you have a look, please?" Yancey jumped to the ground, happy to please the beautiful girl. He began examining the saddle. "Wait a minute," said Louise. "Let me get down. You will get better at it." Without waiting for his help, she slipped from the saddle and stood by the side of the Mustang. The young man continued to examine the saddle. Then he fixed something. "Now, Miss Poindexter, I think it will do," he said at last. "Perhaps it will," said Louise, putting her hand on the saddle and shaking it. "No doubt it will do now. After all, it's a pity to go back so soon. I arrived not long after a fast gallop, and my poor Luna hasn't had time to breathe. What if we stop here and let her have a little rest? It's cruel to take her back without it." "But your father?" asked the young planter. "He said that I should only go at once." "That's nothing. You only wanted to get me out of the way of these rough men. It's a nice place here, so cool under these fine trees. Let us stay a while and give Luna a rest. And we can watch these beautiful silver fish in the stream. Look, there, Mr. Yancey, what little pretty creatures they are." The young planter didn't want to upset the beautiful girl. "Miss Poindexter," he said, "I am happy to stay here as long as you wish it." They stayed by the side of the stream. Yancey was surprised to see Louise's interest in the silver fish and the spotted Mustang. He preferred to have some of her attention to himself. Louise, in fact, tried to catch every sound that came from the hut. The young man couldn't help listening, too. First they heard a number of voices. Then only one voice was left. Louise recognized this angry voice. It belonged to her cousin Cassius. Louise couldn't stay away any longer. She rushed to the hut as quickly as it was possible. Yancey noticed that at the last moment, so he couldn't stop the girl. The men whom she had left behind were no longer in different groups. They gathered into a crowd, in shape of a circle. Inside them there were the chief of the regulators, with 3 or 4 of his assistants. Woodley Poindexter was there too, and by his side Cassius Calhoun. Both of them were mainly spectators now. It was a trial for murder, with a jury of regulators. The prisoners, Maurice Gerald and his servant Phelim, were already inside the circle, on the grass. The regulators had tied them up, so they could move neither hand nor foot. Maurice couldn't even speak, because a gag had been put between his teeth. The trial lasted only 10 minutes. In fact, the jury didn't need more time. Everyone was sure that Henry Poindexter was dead, and that Maurice Gerald was responsible for his death. The jury asked Phelim what he had to say. It was no use putting questions to his master. The servant told his story about a horseman without a head, the Indians, and the jaguar. Too strange to be true, his story only confirmed the suspicion that Headless Horseman was a part of the plan of murder. All those stories about tiger fights and Indians are lies, said the spectators. He's trying to protect the murderer. Why should we believe him? Finally, the jury expressed their opinion. Maurice Gerald must die. But some people didn't like the verdict. Among them was Sam Manley, the chief of the regulators. "Fellow citizens," he cried, as soon as he had an opportunity of making himself heard, "I think we should give the man a chance to speak. It's no use asking him questions now, as you all see. I think we should postpone the trial till—" "What's the use of postponing it?" interrupted Cassius Calhoun. "What's the use, Sam Manley? What more do you want to show that he's guilty? More proofs?" "That's just what we want, Captain Calhoun." "Can you give them, Mr. Cassius Calhoun?" asked a voice. "Perhaps I can. Let's have them then." "Well then, there's enough proof, and more than enough in my opinion. But if you want more, I can give it." "Give it!" cried several people. "Gentlemen," said Calhoun, "you all know what happened between this man and me. I never wanted revenge. I don't want it now. But what I heard—" "What did you hear, Mr. Calhoun?" asked Manley. "What did you hear? And where? And when did you hear it?" "It was the night my cousin was missing, last Tuesday night." "Tuesday night, well?" "I couldn't get any sleep with the heat, so I got up again and went to the roof to smoke a cigar. It was about midnight, or maybe a little earlier. Just as I was about to take a second cigar out of my case, I heard the voices of two men. They were up the river, as I thought, on the other side. There was loud, angry talk between them. I could tell that two men were quarreling. As I listened, I recognized one of the voices, and then the other. The first was my cousin Henry's. The second, of the man who is there, the man who has murdered him." "Please continue, Mr. Calhoun. You can say your opinion later." "Well, gentlemen, as you may imagine, I was surprised to hear my cousin's voice so late at night. I knew it was his voice, and I was quite sure that the other was that of the horse hunter. I listened to catch what the quarrel was about, but I couldn't make out anything that was said on either side. Henry called him by some strong names. Then the Irishman threatened. Each loudly pronounced the other's name. I decided to go out and see what the trouble was. But I was in my slippers, and before I could put my boots on, it was all over. I waited for Henry, but he didn't come home. I thought he had gone back to the fort to meet some of his friends, so I went back to bed. Now, gentlemen, I've told you all I know. My poor cousin never came back to Casa del Corvo. He's somewhere in the prairie, and there's the only man who knows where." Calhoun's story seemed true. This time, almost all the searchers demanded the punishment. At that moment, a beautiful woman passed like a meteor through the crowd to the mustanger. "Texans! Cowards!" she cried. "Shame! And you call this justice? Texan justice? You don't ever hear the man. Murderers!" "What does it mean, Louise?" shouted Poindexter, rushing up and seizing his daughter by the arm. "You are mad! Didn't I tell you to go home? Away! Do not interfere with what doesn't concern you." "Father, it does concern me." "How?" "Oh, true, as a sister. This man is the murderer of your brother." "I will not. Can't believe it. Never. There was no motive. Give him a fair trial and then—" "He's had a fair trial," said one of the men. "He's guilty. He's killed your brother, and nobody else. Mr. Poindexter, you'd better take your daughter away." "Come, Louise, you must come away. Here, Cash, hold her arm, and conduct her from the spot. Louise, if you refuse to go willingly, we'll use force. Do as I tell you. Go. Go." Calhoun dragged Louise from the crowd. She didn't stop protesting, but she could do nothing to help the hero of her heart. Chapter 25. Zeb Interferes. The regulators gathered around Maurice Gerald again. They had no pity for him. They wished to hang the man as soon as possible. Bill, are you ready with the rope?" shouted one of the hangmen to the other. "All right," answered Bill. "We'll hang the scoundrel. Up with him, come." "No, you don't," shouted a loud voice. A big man with a rifle rushed out from among the trees into the center of the crowd. "No, you don't," repeated the man. "Drop the rope or I'll shoot. Drop it." The words of the man made the hangmen stop because he was Zeb Stump. Almost all the searchers knew him. Most of them respected the hunter. Many of them were afraid of him. Among the last were Bill Griffin and his friends. "You don't mean to hang this man, boys," continued Zeb, "do you?" "We do," answered a voice. "And why not?" asked another. "Why not? You can't hang a fellow citizen without a trial, can't you?" "Not much of a fellow citizen. Besides, he's had a trial, a fair trial." "A man who's got a fever and can't defend himself? You call that a fair trial, do you?" "It doesn't matter. We know he's guilty. We're all satisfied with that." "You, Sam Manley, and you, Mr. Poindexter, surely you haven't agreed to this murder." "You haven't heard anything, Zeb Stump," said the regulator chief. "There are facts." "Facts? I don't want to hear them. It'll be enough time for them when there's a real trial. Any objections?" "You take too much upon yourself, Zeb Stump. It's none of your business. The man that's been murdered wasn't your son. Not your brother. Not your cousin," said Calhoun. "It doesn't concern you." "It does. It concerns me. First, because this young fellow is my friend, though he's Irish. And secondly, because Zeb Stump doesn't like foul play," said the hunter. "Give the young fellow a fair trial in the fort. You've got no proof. I know that young Poindexter was his friend." "You don't know other facts, Mr. Stump," said the regulator chief in a calm voice. "We've got proof that there was a quarrel between Gerald and young Poindexter that night." "Who says that, Sam Manley?" "I say it," answered Calhoun, stepping a little forward. "Oh, you do, Mr. Cash Calhoun. Did you see the quarrel?" "I haven't said that I saw it, Zeb Stump. And what's more, I'm not going to answer any questions from you. I don't see why this old fool should interrupt." "Old fool," said the hunter. "You call me an old fool? You'll live to take those words back, or my name isn't Zeb Stump of Kentucky." "Never mind now. There'll be time for that, Mr. Cash Calhoun. As for a quarrel between Henry Poindexter and the young fellow here," continued the hunter, "I won't believe until there's better proof than his words. You say you've got new facts? I've got facts too." "What facts?" demanded the chief of regulators. "Let's hear them, Stump." "First, what do you think of the young fellow's wounds? I don't talk about the scratches. I believe they've been done by coyotes that attacked him. But look at his knee. Something else than coyotes did that. He hurt his head as well. What do you make of it, Sam Manley?" Well, some of the boys here think that there was a fight between him and... Between him and who? Asked Zeb. Why, the man that's missing. Yes, that's he who we mean, said one of the regulators. They began fighting and fell on the rocks. That's how he hurt his knee. Besides, there's the mark of a blow on his head. From the gun, I think. As for the scratches, we can't tell what made them. That foolish fellow has a story about a tiger, but it won't do for us. What fellow are you talking about? You mean Irish Phelim? Where is he? He stole away. We'll find him later and draw the truth out of him. If you mean about the tiger, you'll draw no other truth out of him, what you have already. I saw the jaguar myself, and was there just in time to save the young fellow. But that's not the point. Did Phelim tell you nothing about what he had seen? He said something about Indians. Who believes it? Well, he told me the same story. There's clearly some truth in it. Besides, he says they were playing cards. I found them on the floor of the hut. They are Mexican cards. Zed drew the cards out of his pocket and gave them to the chief of regulators. Who ever heard of Comanches playing cards? Asked the man. Nonsense. Nonsense, you say, said an old hunter, who had been 12 months a prisoner among the Comanches. It may be nonsense, but it's true. The Comanches do play cards. I saw them play cards more than once. Zeb Stump was glad to hear these words, which could help him to postpone the trial. Sure, he said, it could be Indians, or something like them. Oh, what's that? Where's she coming from? No one asked Stump what he meant. Along the top of the cliff and close to its edge, everybody saw a horse. There was a woman, a lady on his back, with no hat. The men recognized her at first glance. She was their guide. It was that beautiful Mexican girl who half an hour before showed the searchers the way to the hut. Chapter 26. Comanches chase Isadora. It was indeed Isadora, but what was bringing her back? To explain it, we must return to her thoughts after the meeting with the Texans. When the men rushed to the Alamo, Isadora headed her horse to her uncle's hacienda. There was only one thing on her mind: revenge, so she went on without even giving a glance behind. After a while, Isadora realized that Louise wasn't on the road to the Leona. She's changed her mind. She's stayed by the hut, thought the Mexican girl. That's even better. It's only fair to bring shame on her. She's the one who has stolen the man I love. Suddenly she stopped. What have I done? She whispered. If these men find him guilty, where may it end? In his death. I don't want that. When I pointed out the way, how quickly they rode off without even thinking about me. Oh, they have made up their minds that he should die. He's a stranger among them, not of their country, alone without any friends, and with many enemies. At that moment she heard the sound of hoofs. Then she heard men's voices. First, Isadora wasn't alarmed. Some travelers, perhaps. They may be going to the Rio Grande, she thought. It is only natural to be so careful when the Indians are on the warpath. After a while, Isadora heard the sounds of hoofs again. The horsemen were heading towards her, and not along the road, but through the bushes. It could be robbers or Indians. What should she do? The girl rode to one side of the road to hide and take her horse under a big tree, but she didn't stay there long. The strangers were clearly trying to surround her. She could tell this, hearing the sounds of hoofs in different directions. It frightened Isadora. She realized that she would soon be discovered. Isadora rode out from the forest into the open plain and galloped along the road to the Alamo. At that moment the horseman burst forth from among the bushes, almost as fast as she herself. They rode towards her. When she looked back, she could see men of bronze-colored skins, with red paint on their faces and red feathers in their hair. The Indians, thought the Mexican. 4 of them. 4 Indians were too many against one, and that one a woman. Isadora thought that her only hope was to get to the Alamo under the protection of the Texans. As soon as she was by the edge of the cliff, she cried, "Texans, save me! Save me! The Indians! They are behind me! Close! Close!" The leading Indian was so eager to throw his lasso at the girl that he paid no attention to her cry. He didn't even hear a rifle shot. He just let go his lasso and looked below in surprise. He saw 100 men with 100 guns. His 3 followers saw them at the same time. All 4 turned and rode away from the cliff. The Indians made part of the jury change their opinion about Maurice Gerald. The chief of the regulators had to respect their wish. He decided to carry the mustanger to the fort and have a proper trial there. "What about the Indians? Should we follow them?" asked one of the Texans. "Of course," said another man. "But when? Now?" "Let us wait till the woman comes down," said one of the officers. "She may know more about the Indians. There may be much more of them." Some minutes later, the Texans began to feel the alarm. "Where is the niece of Silvio Martinez? Can it be that she is taken?" Finally, the younger ones jumped into their saddles and went off in search of Isadora, to save her from the Indians. The older men preferred to stay by the hut. Zeb Stump was among them. He took the gag from between the teeth of the unconscious prisoner and cut the ropes. The old hunter was not the only friend who remained true to the mustanger. There were 2 other people. One, a beautiful girl, was watching him at a distance, trying not to show her interest. The other, Phelim, had just left the top of the tree and was going to take care of his master. The campaign against the Comanches was short. It lasted only 3 or 4 days. It was discovered that the Indians didn't mean war. It was an attack of some young Indians who wanted to return home with something to show to the tribe. The soldiers found them among the hills of the San Saba. The Comanches were lucky to escape by going beyond the neutral ground. The soldiers returned to Fort Inge to their duties. The men who had gone in search of the Indians after their attack on Isadora found no Indians on the Alamo. They even brought proof: blue, green, and red feathers, some clothes, and war paint. They had found all this in a hole of a big tree. Chapter 27. Sorrow and Mystery. There was great change in Casa del Corvo after the death of Henry Poindexter. The members of the planter's family no longer doubted that he was dead. There were only 3 of them left, and they met only in the dining room, talking very little to each other. It was a hard time for Louise. Apart from the sorrow about her brother, she felt a strong fear of losing the man she loved. She knew that Maurice Gerald was shut up within the walls of a prison, the strong walls of a military guardhouse, but she couldn't show herself at the prison without risk to her reputation. There were soldiers on guard, and always a crowd around it. On the morning of the 4th day, Zeb Stump appeared at Casa del Corvo. He told Louise that the soldiers had come back to the fort. "Nobody can take the young fellow from his guards now, so you needn't worry about that," said the old hunter. "What did you do, Zeb?" asked Louise. "Well, in the first place, I've seen the major. I told him the whole story. As far as I know it myself. Luckily, he isn't against the young fellow. The major doubled the guards around the prison." "I am so glad. You think there's no danger from—" "If you mean Mr. Miguel Diaz, yes. Before he thinks about getting anybody else out of a prison, he must get himself out first." "What? Diaz in prison? How? When? Where?" "You've asked 3 separate questions at once, Miss Louise. I'll start with the last one. Where? There's only one prison in these parts. That is the guardhouse at the fort. He's there. Along with— I know who you're going to name, the young fellow. Yes, they're in the same building, though not in the same room. There are 3 others along with the Mexican, his comrades. This is good news, but how and when? You've not told me. Give me a little time, Miss Louise. Your second question was when. He was locked up about an hour ago. I saw it with my own eyes. After that, I've come straight here. But you haven't said why he was arrested. This Mexican, Miguel Diaz, I mean. I think I know something of the man. I have reasons. And you are not the only person who may have reasons for knowing him, Miss Louise. What I know, or strongly suspect, is that this Miguel Diaz has had something to do with... You know what I mean. Go on, Mr. Stump. Well, the story is this. The fellows, who went in search of the Indians, found out that they were not Indians at all. You've heard that yourself. Some things were discovered in the hole of a tree. It's clear now that what we saw on the cliff was a group of whites. I suspected it myself when I saw the cards they'd left in the hut. It was the same, then, who visited the hut at night? The same Phelim saw? Yes, the same Mexicans. Why do you think they were Mexicans? I found them, said Zeb. You see, the cards, and also some words which the Irishman remembered, told me that they should be Mexican. I know enough about the Mexicans of these parts to guess what they could be. Well, as soon as soldiers came back with the story of whites instead of redskins, I took my old mare and rode out to the place where our fellows had hidden their things. I tracked every horse of the four scoundrels to his own stable. Besides, on one of them, I'd made my mark. Your mark? How, Zeb? You remember the shot I fired from the door of the hut? Oh, certainly. I didn't see the Indians. I was under the trees at the time. I heard your shot. Well, Miss Louise, I know my bullet hurt one of them. And what did you do? I talked to the major, and in half an hour, the four of them were locked up in the guardhouse. Miguel Diaz was taken first. We found my mark on his right arm. It was Diaz, then. Very strange, thought Louise. And the woman, this Mexican, Isadora? Ah, there is some mystery in all this. Tell me, dear Zeb, she asked, stepping closer to the old hunter. That woman, the Mexican lady, I mean. Who was out there? Do you know if she often visited him? Him? Which him, Miss Louise? Mr. Gerald, I mean. I don't know. I don't often go to the Alamo myself. You'd better ask Irish Phelim. But if you ask my opinion, I'd say that the girl was there only once. I know nothing about her. I only know about the other lady's visit to the hut. Who? She asked. At that moment she regretted that she had asked the question. The color came to her cheeks as she noticed Zeb's glance. Never mind, she continued, without waiting for an answer. So, Zeb, she went on, you think that these men could do it with Henry, these Mexicans? To tell you the truth, Miss Louise, I don't know what to think. Sometimes I think the Mexicans did it. Sometimes I think that somebody else has had a hand in the black business. I won't say who. Not him, Zeb. Not him. Not the mustanger. I'm sure about that. But how can he prove it? Everything is against him. I can't say that. I didn't have much chance of getting about because I had to keep an eye on the mustanger and his prison. But there's an opportunity now, and I plan to use it. The Prairie is a big book, Miss Poindexter, a wonderful big book for people who know how to read it. I've learnt to do that. Do you think you can discover some traces? I'm going out to have a good look around me, especially at the place where I found the young fellow in the claws of the jaguar. I must start straight away, Miss Louise. The trial may be in less than 3 days, and I must get back before it begins. Go, Zeb, and come back with proofs of his innocence. Chapter 28. In the Stable. The hunter went to the stable where he had left his mare. The horse was eating some corn cobs, which Pluto had put before her. The servant himself was standing by her side. He was unusually silent after the loss of his young master. Zeb didn't notice the sad mood of the servant. He was in a great hurry to let the old mare finish her meal. He pulled on the reins and tried to lead her out. The mare didn't turn without a struggle. "Ho, ho, Mr. Stump," cried Pluto. "Why are you in such a big hurry? Why don't you let her eat all this corn? It'll do her a lot of good." "I can't stay here long. I'm going off on a bit of a journey. I've got about 100 miles to make in less than a couple of hours." "Ho, ho, that's the fastest kind of traveling. Are you joking, Mr. Stump?" "No, I am not. They make wonderful journeys on these prairies. I think that horse over there traveled 200 miles the other night." "What horse?" "That old black horse over there, Mr. Calhoun's horse." "What makes you think he traveled 200 miles?" "Because he was so done up that he could hardly walk, ho-ho." "What night are you talking about, Pluto?" "What night? Let me see. Why, of course, the night Mr. Henry didn't come home. I saw that horse in the morning, about an hour after sunrise. I didn't see him before then. When I came to the stable, he was so tired." "Who had let him out that night?" "I don't know, Mr. Stump. Only that nobody is allowed to ride it except Mr. Calhoun himself." "Why, wasn't it Captain Calhoun himself who took the animal out?" "I don't know, Mr. Stump. If the owner of the horse took it out himself, there's an end of it. He has the right to ride his horse wherever he wants. It's none of my business." "Ho, ho, neither mine, Mr. Stump. But I didn't think that way this morning. I was wrong." "What happened this morning?" "Oh, what happened this morning? I got kicked, Mr. Stump." "Kicked? Which of the horses kicked you?" "Oh, not the horses, but the master of them. I was kicked by Mr. Calhoun." "For what reason?" "I only asked the captain what had put his old horse in such a bad condition, and what had made him so tired. He said it wasn't my business, and then he kicked me. And then he started to lash me with his whip. I'd never seen Mr. Calhoun so mad, never in all my life." "But where is he now? I didn't see him here today." "He's rode out, Mr. Stump. He goes much away from the house now." "On horseback?" "Yes, he goes on the gray horse. He hasn't ridden the black one since that night." "Look here, Pluto," said Zeb, after standing silent for a second or two. "After all, I'd better let the old mare have a couple of these corn cobs. She's got a long journey before her. While she's eating, I could do the same myself. Can you go to the kitchen and see if there's something to chew? A bit of cold meat and a piece of cornbread will do." "Of course, Mr. Stump. I'll go and get more than this." The black servant left the stable. Zeb Stump went to Calhoun's black horse. "I don't mean any harm to you," he said. "Let's have a look at your feet." He lifted the horse's feet, one after the other. On one of the feet he discovered a broken horseshoe. Almost a quarter of the shoe was missing from the hoof. Zeb drew his huge hunting knife and used it to take the broken shoe off the hoof. Then he put it in the pocket. After a while, Pluto returned to the stable. He brought a lot of food and a small bottle of whiskey. "Look here, Pluto," said Zeb some minutes later. "Who puts shoes on your horses? Your own people?" "Yes, Yellow Jake. Why do you ask, Mr. Stump?" "Well, I'd like to shoe the mare. Do you think Jake could do it for me?" "Oh ho, I'm sure he'd do it with pleasure. Question is, if I can wait. How long does it take him to put on a couple of shoes?" "Not long, Mr. Stump. Besides, he has the shoes already. I know it because Jake's going to shoe the black horse. One of his shoes is broken. It happened 10 days ago. Mr. Calhoun told Jake to take off the broken shoe and put a new one. This very morning. I heard him myself." "After all," said Zeb, as if suddenly changing his mind, "I can do it when I come back. I don't have time for that now." "No, I don't have time," he added, when stepped outside. "I must be off. Now, old girl, stop chewing and take this bit between your teeth." The hunter led the animal out of the stable, got into the saddle, and headed his horse in the direction of Fort Inge. It took Zeb less than a quarter of an hour to reach the fort. Usually it took him 3, but this time he was very excited. When he rode into the square, he slipped out of the saddle and went to see Major Ringwood. The guard passed him without any questions, and an officer warned the military chief of the fort about his new visitor. "Ah, Mr. Stump, glad to see you so soon," said Major Ringwood. "Have you found anything useful? From your quick return, I can almost say you have. Something, I hope, that can help this poor young fellow. I still believe he's innocent. What have you learnt?" "Well, Major," said Zeb, taking off his hat, "what I've learnt isn't much, though enough to bring me back to the fort. I came back here to have a word with you." "Of course. What is it you have to say?" "That you should keep back the trial as long as you can. I know there's a pressure from outside, but I know, too, that you've got the power to resist it, Major." "Yes, I have that, Mr. Stump, but I can't go against the law." "I don't ask you to do that, Major. You know there are people here who want to take it into their own hands. One especially wants to do it. I know who that one is. At least, I guess who that may be." "Who? Can you keep a secret, Major? I know you can." "Mr. Stump, you may speak your mind. Everything we say here is between you and me." "Well, Major, I can say that the murderer is not Maurice the Mustanger." "That's my opinion as well. You know it already. Can you say more?" "Perhaps I can, Major, but the time's not right for that yet. I've got only suspicions. I may be wrong, and I'd better keep them to myself for the time being. First, I need to make a short excursion across to the Nueces River." "I'll be glad to wait for your return, Mr. Stump. What do you need me to do while you're away?" "Keep back the trial, only that. The rest will be all right." "How long? Can you promise me 3 days?" "Oh, I think I can do that. I give you an officer's promise that for 3 days Maurice the Mustanger will not go out of my guardhouse, innocent or guilty. For that time, he will be protected." "Thank you, Major. You're a good man, and a good friend," said the hunter, and left. Chapter 29. Zeb Stump on the Trail. The hunter rode away from the fort and returned on the road to Casa del Corvo. When he reached Poindexter's plantation, he stopped. Calhoun's horse was out the same night and returned home done up. What could that mean, he asked himself. Could he kill his own cousin? He could do that, or any other bad thing, if there was a reason for that, but there isn't. I can't think of any such reason. Old Poindexter doesn't own anything on this ground any longer. All belongs to Calhoun. Why should he want to kill his cousin? There's also this Mustanger, and the sham Indians, and this Mexican girl, and the Horseman without a head. What a puzzle. Zeb looked around as if in search of answers. Then he said some words to his mare and went in the direction of the Nueces River. After a while, he changed his course and headed to the Rio Grande. The hunter had ridden about a mile in the new direction when something made him stop. He got out of the saddle and dropped down on his knees. Then he drew the broken shoe out of his pocket and put it in the hoof mark on the ground. It fitted. "That's the mark of the traitor, and perhaps a murderer," said Zeb. He spent a few more minutes on the spot. After that he rose to his feet and went on foot along the trail of the horse with the broken shoe. The old mare followed him. He was more than a mile from that spot when he heard a shot. He stopped and raised his eyes. He saw a small cloud of blue smoke above the trees. Who can be hunting out there, he asked himself. I know there's nothing in that forest except coyotes. Hey, something's coming this way. A horse, and somebody on his back. What? It's the Headless Horseman. The old hunter was right. There could be no mistake about the rider, who was galloping towards the spot where Zeb stood. It was the Horseman without a head. Zeb Stump was a brave man. He was never afraid of jaguars, bears, or the Indians. But it wasn't easy for him to come face to face with something that was absolutely unnatural. He saw some bushes close by, They could give him the chance of a hiding place. "Down!" he cried to his mare. The horse dropped down on her front knees, and then lay down on the grass. Zeb hid in the bushes. The Headless Horseman came galloping up. He saw neither the hunter nor his horse. As the horse passed Zeb, he saw under the serape a shirt he had seen before. It was a shirt of blue cotton. Though there were spots of dark red blood on the shirt, the hunter recognized it. Everything, the horse, the saddle, the striped serape, the sky blue shirt and trousers, was known to him. The hunter didn't try to stop the rider. He said in a slow, sad tone, "It's true then. Poor young fellow is dead." The Headless Horseman galloped on over the prairie. Zeb followed him only with his eyes. He was about to get on his feet when he saw a man on horseback, a real horseman, with a head upon his shoulders. He was examining the ground over which he was guiding his horse. Zeb guessed what this horseman was doing. He was tracking the headless rider. "Ho ho," he whispered. "I'm not the only one who's got a reason for solving this mystery. Who can he be? I'd like to know that." Zeb didn't have to wait for an answer very long. The man approached the bushes, and the hunter saw who he was. It was Cassius Calhoun. The ex-captain was wearing his usual dark blue military suit and a cap. He had a knife and guns on his belt. It was not Calhoun's weapons that kept Zeb Stump from showing himself. He wasn't afraid to meet the ex-officer of volunteers. He remained in the bushes to see what the captain would be doing. Calhoun passed the hunter and his horse. Zeb Stump decided to follow him. The hunter didn't need to stay close to Calhoun. He was sure he could easily find the trails of the horseman without a head and the horseman without a heart. After a while, Zeb saw the captain again. He was examining the edge of the chalk prairie. Zeb guessed that Calhoun had lost the trail of the Headless Horseman and was trying to find it again. The captain failed to do it and angrily galloped off in the direction of the Leona. Zeb also tried to find the lost trail, but the sunlight was so bright that it was impossible to do it. The hunter decided to return to the forest. After a while, he saw the hoof marks of 3 horses. All 3 had gone over the same ground, but at separate times. First, a Mustang, then an American horse. The horse with the broken shoe was behind both horses. "Here they've separated," said the hunter, examining the ground at his feet. "The horse with the broken shoe went in a different direction. Why? If I go after these 2, I know where they'll lead. They'll come up to that pool of blood. Let's track this one." Zeb followed the trail of the horse with the broken shoe. It led him to a spot where the horse had stood tied to a tree. The footprints of a man could be seen on the ground. Zeb discovered 2 sets of them, one going, another coming back. The old hunter left his mare there and followed the footprints of the rider. They brought him out into the opening, close to the pool of blood. On the way there, he saw a spot where a man had remained for some time. The same footprints were leading out towards the pool of blood, and then coming back again. And in the branches of a tree, Zeb Stump saw a small half-burnt piece of paper. He took the paper from the thorn and read on it the initials he knew very well, CCC. "That's a piece of a letter," he said. "It was used as a wad." The hunter drew out a wallet out of his pocket, put the paper into it, and returned the wallet to his pocket. "Well," he said, "the man who was murdered was out there by that pool of blood. The man who did it was standing behind this tree." Zeb returned to the place where the horse with the broken shoe had been left. Not far from that spot, he discovered another path. The hunter saw that several shod horses had passed along it some days before. "It's Spangler and the other searchers," said Zeb. He went along the path looking for the hoof marks of Henry Poindexter's horse. After a while, the hunter stopped near a huge tree with a low, thick branch. He looked at the bark of the branch. "What about this cut?" he asked himself. "It's been done by a head." The man was on horseback. He struck his head against the branch. Of course, he couldn't keep in the saddle after that. "I thought so." Ah, he fell right here and hurt his leg. And that's where he began crawling. Zeb Stump followed the trail of the wounded man to the stream. Chapter 30. A Horse Exchange. Calhoun turned away from the edge of the chalk prairie where he had lost the trail of the Headless Horseman. No use following further. If I go back to the river, I may see him again, but I need another horse, fast enough to overtake the Mustang. There must be one like that in town. I'll see when I get back, he told himself. Calhoun was already not far from Casa del Corvo when he saw a horse with a rider upon his back. It was Isidoro Covarubio de los Llanos. She noticed him, too. In Calhoun, Isidora saw the man who loved the woman she herself hated. In Isidora, Calhoun saw the woman who loved the man he hated and wanted to destroy. The situation didn't make them friends. It is not natural that man or woman should like the admirer of a rival. Cassius Calhoun and Isidora Covarubio de los Llanos were about to pass each other when a thought crossed his mind. "Excuse me, miss," he said, looking at her horse. "I know it's very rude to talk to you, as we are strangers. If I'm not mistaken, we met before, on the prairie, out near the Nueces." "True," said Calhoun. "We saw you later, too, as you came galloping along the cliff. We all wondered what had happened to you. The shot which some of your people fired from below made those Indians leave. I mean the sham Indians, as we know now. As soon as they left, I continued my journey. I couldn't help noticing your splendid horse. He was not galloping, miss, he was flying." "Are you joking, sir? There's nothing splendid about him. Perhaps a little pretty and quick. My father has 5,000 horses like him. Many of them are prettier, and, no doubt, faster than him." "Excuse me, miss, I should be only too glad to make an exchange with you. My horse is expensive, though he's a little slow, but I can promise that he will carry you safely to your home, and will serve you well afterwards." "What?" exclaimed the lady in surprise. "Exchange your wonderful American horse for a Mexican Mustang? Do you know that on the Rio Grande for one of your horses, you can get 3, sometimes 6 of ours?" Calhoun knew this very well, but he knew also that he needed Isidora's quick Mustang. "If it's not a joke, you can have what you want," said Isidora. "It's not a joke." "Take him then," she said, "but we can't exchange saddles. Yours would be too big for me." Calhoun was so happy that he couldn't find words to thank Isidora. He took off her saddle and then took off his own. In less than 5 minutes, the horses were exchanged. Isidora almost laughed, but for Calhoun it was a very serious and important matter. As soon as the exchange was over, Isidora went off on Calhoun's horse. The ex-officer headed the gray Mustang in the direction of Casa del Corvo. Zeb arrived at the spot where he had left his mare. He began following the trail of the horse with the broken shoe again. He was sure that this trail would lead him to Casa del Corvo. Not far from the hacienda, he saw Cassius Calhoun and Isidoro Covarubio de los Llanos. He hid in the bushes and listened to their conversation. What could be Calhoun's motive to exchange horses, he thought. Zeb knew that the Mexican girl was right. The American horse was far more expensive than the Mustang. There's only one explanation, he told himself. The gray Mustang is the faster of the two, and Mr. Cash wants him because he is fast. He wants to overtake the Headless Horseman. He's tried his own horse, and found him slow. Now he thinks, with the Mustang, he may have a better chance to get the fellow. Woodley Poindexter entered his daughter's room. "Louise, I wanted to talk to you," he said. "What is it, father?" "You know that your cousin Cash loves you. He wants to marry you." "But I don't want to marry him." "No, father. I shall die first. I know what it means. He has sent you to make this proposal. I'd rather go to the prairies to catch wild horses with the lasso than become his wife." "Dear daughter, you, perhaps, don't know that my cousin is your creditor?" "I know all that, dear father. But I know also that you are Woodley Poindexter, and I am your daughter." "Forgive me, my girl," said the proud planter. "I shall leave it to you. You are free to refuse to marry him, if that's what you want." Less than an hour after that conversation, Louise Poindexter refused to marry Cassius Calhoun. Her cousin didn't show surprise. Probably he expected such an answer. "Well," he said with a sneering smile, "though I'm not master of your heart, your happiness is in my hands. Tomorrow is the day of the trial. Mr. Maurice Gerald will be accused of murdering your brother." "It's a lie. Maurice Gerald never did it." "Well, that remains to be proved. No one knows, Louise, about your meeting with Gerald in the garden. No one knows about his quarrel with Henry. There were only 2 people who saw what happened after that quarrel." "2? Who were they?" "One was Cassius Calhoun. The other, Louise Poindexter." The girl didn't even look surprised. "Do you understand me? You know what I mean?" asked Calhoun. "Yes." "You will not refuse me now?" "Now more than ever." "Be it so. Tomorrow you'll stand before the judge as a witness, and nobody'll save you from shame. Good night, Louise. I'll sleep thinking of you." Calhoun left the room, looking less triumphant than guilty. Chapter 31. A Texan Court. The following morning, a lot of different people gathered around Fort Inge. Planters, lawyers, hunters, cattle dealers, and horse dealers, storekeepers, adventurers. Many of them had with them their wives, sisters, and daughters. Some were on horseback, others stayed in wagons or in elegant carriages. All these people had come for the trial of Maurice Gerald, known as Maurice the Mustanger. They had little doubt that he had done it. They only waited to learn the details, how and when and where. The trial began at 10 o'clock. There was no courthouse in the fort. The day promised to be hot, and it was decided that the judge would sit at a large table under a tree. Close to the judge there were 12 people. About half of them chose to sit on a rough bench, the other half on the grass. It was the jury. Other people gathered around the judge and jury. Before the trial, Miguel Diaz and his 3 companions said that they had disguised themselves as Indians. They explained that it had been a joke. It was also proved that Diaz had been drunk on the night of Henry Poindexter's disappearance, and his friends had been at home, so the Mexicans were released from prison. The Mustanger was brought before the court. The judge asked him his first question. "Maurice Gerald, are you guilty or not guilty of this crime?" "Not guilty," firmly said the Mustanger. Then the prosecutor called his first witness. It was Franz Oberdorfer, the owner of the hotel and the saloon. He repeated the story he had told before. Other witnesses confirmed that the prisoner and Henry Poindexter had been friends. Captain Cassius Calhoun told the court about the scene in the garden. He said that Henry had followed the Mustanger, but he kept to himself the true reason for this and his own actions. Then Louise Poindexter was called. Calhoun had kept his word. "Where were you, Miss Poindexter, on the night when your brother was last seen?" asked the prosecutor. "At home, in my father's house." May I ask if on that night you went into the garden? I did. Was there someone with you? There was. My brother was there, and Mr. Maurice Gerald. May I ask the motive of your meeting with Mr. Gerald? The witness hesitated only for a moment. I went into the garden to meet the man I love. Now, sir, I hope you are satisfied. The answer caused in the crowd surprise, and something more, contempt, and even indignation. I must ask you another question, Miss Poindexter, said the prosecutor. You have heard what Mr. Calhoun said. Is it true that your brother had a quarrel with Mr. Gerald? Quite true. The answer made the crowd shout. Her words confirmed the story of Calhoun. That was the motive of the murder. Order in the court, cried the judge. But my brother didn't follow him in anger, continued the witness. He realized that he had been wrong and went after Mr. Gerald to apologize. Louise went back to her carriage with a cold feeling in her heart. By telling the truth, she had done harm to Maurice and to herself. Call the witnesses for the defense, said the judge. First Phelim O'Neill was called. His story, full of improbable things, was strange. The lawyer asked to call another witness. Zebulon Stump. A tall hunter made his way through the crowd. Well, Mr. Judge, he said, I've no objection to tell what I know about the business, but I'd prefer that the young fellow should give his story first. I could then confirm it. It would be somewhat irregular, said the judge. After all, we want to get at the truth. If the jury doesn't object, let it be as you say. The jury agreed, too. The mustanger stepped forward. There was universal silence. Everyone was looking at the prisoner. Everyone was eager to catch his words. Judge and gentlemen of the jury, said the mustanger, not all of the statements you heard today are true. Some of them are false as the man who gave them. The speaker glanced at Cassius Calhoun. Then he described what had happened in the garden. It is true that Henry Poindexter interrupted our meeting with his sister in the garden. It's true that I heard angry words from him. But at our next meeting, he apologized for them. Where did this meeting take place? Asked the judge. I'm coming to it now. After I left the garden, I went to the hotel. There was nothing to keep me any longer under Mr. Oberdoffer's roof. So I paid for my stay and I rode off. I knew I could reach the Alamo before morning. I traveled slowly, and I never thought of looking behind me. I had no suspicion that anyone was coming after me until I heard the sound of hoofs, and I saw a horseman. It was Henry. I rode up to him. His first words were to ask if I would forgive him for what he had said to me. He held out his hand in the most friendly manner. Need I tell you that I took that hand? We rode together for a while, and then stopped under the shadow of a tree. We exchanged cigars and smoked, and there was another exchange, to cement our friendship. We exchanged our hats and cloaks. The Comanches do that. I gave Henry Poindexter my Mexican sombrero and striped serape, and took his cloak and Panama hat. Then he rode away, and I stayed to have some rest. A couple of minutes later, I heard a sound. It was a shot. I jumped to my feet and listened, but I could hear nothing more, so I thought I had been mistaken. I lay down on the grass again and fell asleep. I woke up early in the morning. It was cold. It wasn't pleasant to stay longer under the tree, so I decided to continue my journey. But first I wanted to go in the direction in which Henry Poindexter had gone. I needed an explanation for the shot. I didn't go far till I found it. I saw... "The Headless Horseman!" exclaimed a voice from the crowd. "The Headless Horseman!" cried 50 others. "There, he's coming this way!" The Headless Horseman was indeed coming to the fort. Suddenly he stopped and looked at the crowd around the tree. He clearly didn't like it because he turned around and rode off. 3/4 of the crowd rushed towards their horses. They were eager to overtake the Headless Horseman. Chapter 32. The Last Witness. The judge decided to wait for the return of those people who had gone after the Headless Horseman. "If we catch him," he said, "we will throw light on the murder." After a while, almost all the men returned. The only 2 people still missing were the old hunter and the ex-captain of volunteers. An hour later, the judge decided to go on with the trial. The prisoner stood before the judge again. "You were about to tell us what you saw," said the lawyer to the mustanger. "What was it you saw?" "A man, lying on the grass." "Asleep?" "Dead, and with his head cut off." Someone of the crowd cried in horror. "Who was the man?" "It was Henry Poindexter." Cries were heard again. "Continue, sir," asked the lawyer. "I touched the body. It was cold. I could see that Henry had been dead for some time. I also remembered the shot I had heard in the night, so I decided to look for a bullet wound. I turned the body. I was right. I saw a hole in the serape and the shirt covered with blood. I could tell that a bullet had entered there. There was no wound at the back, so I knew that the bullet had to be still inside the body." "What did you do then?" "I couldn't think of leaving the body there. My first idea was to cover the body with the cloak and go to the fort for some help. It would be protected from coyotes till we could get back. But then I changed my mind. I decided to take Henry's body with me. I thought about something I had read about the gauchos of South America. When one dies or is killed by accident, far from home, his friends carry the body in the saddle, seated as though he were still alive. First I tried to set him on his own horse, but his saddle is flat. There was only one other chance for us to make the home journey together, by exchanging horses. I knew that my own horse wouldn't object. Besides, my Mexican saddle is deeper. In a short while I put the body in it, seated. I cut a few pieces of my lasso and used them to fix the body in the saddle. I got on the horse of the murdered man. My own horse was going to follow me. Then I headed back to the fort, but in less than 5 minutes after that I was knocked out of my saddle." "Knocked out of your saddle?" exclaimed the judge. "How did it happen?" "A simple accident. Something frightened the horse, and he rushed along the path, right under a low, thick branch of a large tree. I struck my head against that branch, fell on the ground and hurt my knee. I don't know where the horses went afterwards. You all know that, I believe, better than I. I came to only 2 hours later." Maurice then told the court how he had been attacked by coyotes, and then saved from the claws of the jaguar by Zeb Stump. "Gentlemen of the jury, that's all I remember until the day before yesterday, when I woke up in prison." The judge, jury, and spectators felt that the mustanger's story was true. Still, it was only his own story. There was one witness who could confirm it. Where was Zeb Stump? 500 pairs of eyes turned towards the prairie. 500 hearts hoped the old hunter would return soon, with or without the Headless Horseman. 10 minutes later, the figures of 3 horsemen appeared on the prairie. 2 of them were easily recognized as Zeb Stump and Cassius Calhoun. There wasn't any doubt about the third figure either. It was the Headless Horseman. The riders stopped outside the crowd of spectators. 2 of them slipped out of the saddle. The third one remained in the saddle. Zeb Stump conducted the horse of the Headless Horseman under the tree. Calhoun went away from the crowd. "Now, judge and the jury," he said, "here's your last witness." "It's Henry," a tall man came up to the Headless Horseman. It was his father. Some people led Woodley Poindexter to the carriage. He took a seat by his crying daughter. Zeb Stump came up to the judge. He told the court how he had come to the mustanger's hut to find his servant there, how the dog had come with a card tied to his neck, and how he had found the mustanger and saved him from the jaguar. He then described everything that had happened up to the time the mustanger was locked up in the guardhouse. "And now," he said, "I'm going to say something more, but not about the prisoner, but about the other man. I think this man should be standing in his place. I'll tell you what I know." "Please continue, Mr. Stump," said the lawyer. No one interrupted him. Everyone was sure that the hunter could solve the mystery of the murder. "Well, it was clear for me. It wasn't the mustanger who killed that poor young Poindexter. Who was it then? I decided to discover the truth. I examined all the hoof marks around the place of the murder. There was one particular set of marks that attracted my attention. The hoof marks of an American horse with a broken shoe. Here's it." The hunter drew the shoe out of the pocket of his coat and showed it to the judge and the jury. The man who rode that horse followed Poindexter and Gerald. Then he hid behind the trees and fired the shot that killed poor young Poindexter. He's the murderer. "Who was it? Give his name," asked 20 people. "I think you'll find it in that body. Take out the bullet, and you'll know everything." The judge asked some of the men to examine the Headless Horseman. They took him from the horse and found 2 bullet holes on his body. Zeb pointed to the smaller one. "It's the bullet I fired myself," he said. "You can see that there's no blood around it. It proves that it was a dead body then. The other hole is different. It's all covered in blood. Take out the bullet and you'll see yourself." The doctor took the bullet out and gave it to the jury. The bullet was marked with the letters CCC. Those of the men who had taken part in the search party knew those initials very well. "There's one more thing," said the old hunter, drawing a piece of paper out of his pocket. "I found this in the bushes where the murderer had fired his gun. It came out of the same gun as that bullet. It's a piece of a letter with a name on it. The jury can read the name." One of the men took the piece of paper and read aloud, "Captain Cassius Calhoun." Chapter 33. 2 Shots. The name of the ex-captain made a strong impression on the judge and the jury. The crowd of spectators began shouting. It was clear now that Maurice Gerald was not the man who should be on trial for the murder of Henry Poindexter. Calhoun was the man. Zeb Stump continued his story. He told the court how Calhoun had tried to catch the Headless Horseman to get rid of the marked bullet, and how he had exchanged horses with Isadora. "Mr. Calhoun was going to take the bullet out of his body when I overtook him. He couldn't stop me from bringing the poor boy here," said the hunter. "Let the Irishman go, he is innocent," cried someone from the crowd. "Let Cassius Calhoun be arrested and put on his trial. He's the murderer. That's why he was against the other. If he's innocent, let him prove it. He'll have a fair trial. Come, judge, order Mr. Calhoun to be brought before the court. An innocent man's been there long enough. Let the guilty take his place." The judge couldn't ignore demands of the people. He ordered to bring Calhoun before the court. "Look, it's Calhoun. He's trying to escape." Calhoun reached his gray Mustang, jumped in the saddle, and headed the horse towards the prairie. "Follow him," shouted the judge. "Follow and bring him back." 50 horsemen rushed towards their horses. Zeb Stump and Maurice the mustanger were among them. "He will not escape," said those people who had remained under the tree. Calhoun failed to escape. He was already in the woods when he saw Maurice Gerald behind. The captain turned around and fired his revolver, but the bullet whistled through the air and did no harm to the mustanger. Maurice threw his lasso and jerked Calhoun out of his saddle. "You, up, old boss," said Zeb Stump, riding up to the man on the ground. "Up, I say, and come along with us. It won't do to keep the court waiting." "I'm not going back," said Calhoun. He looked at Stump and Gerald around him. Then he tried to reach his revolver. "Bad idea," said the hunter, pointing to his rifle. "Get into the saddle, Mr. Cash Calhoun, I say." The ex-captain of cavalry got on his Mustang. The hunter led him to the fort on foot. His own mare followed him. The mustanger rode behind. A new trial began. The judge was the same, the jury the same, and the spectators as before. There was only one change. Maurice Gerald was no longer the prisoner. Cassius Calhoun was the prisoner now. It was clear to everyone that he was guilty of the murder. But why did he kill his own cousin? And why did he cut off his head? Only the murderer could answer these questions. The trial was short. After a while, the jury found Calhoun guilty. The judge invited the prisoner to make his final speech. Calhoun looked around. He saw no face with an expression of sympathy. There wasn't even pity. "Have you anything to say about the verdict?" asked the judge. "No," he said. "It's a right verdict. I deserve to lose my life. It's quite true that I killed Henry Poindexter. You are all asking what motive I had. There was no motive." The spectators looked at the prisoner in surprise. It was hard to believe him. "It's easily explained. I killed him by mistake. Yes, by mistake. I was going to kill the man who is standing before me." Calhoun looked at Maurice Gerald with hatred. "Yes, I wanted to kill him. I had my reasons. I'm not going to say what they were. It's no use now. I thought I had killed him. You know that this man exchanged cloaks with my cousin. I shot Henry by mistake. Poor boy dropped from his horse, and to make more sure, I drew my knife and cut off his head." The crowd demanded to punish the murderer. "Now," cried Calhoun, "I've got one more thing to do." Suddenly, he drew a revolver. 2 shots came at once, and 2 men fell forward on their faces. One was Maurice Gerald, the mustanger. The other, Cassius Calhoun, ex-captain of volunteer cavalry. Calhoun had fired the bullet right in the mustanger's heart. Luckily, it hit a small locket, a gift from Louise Poindexter, then turned aside and scratched his arm. The wound wasn't serious, but Louise made him stay in bed for a week. She spent all this time in his hut, at his bedside. No one objected, not even her own father. The planter was no longer against Louise's marriage to Maurice Gerald. He was even happy to have such a son-in-law, because he was, in fact, Sir Maurice Gerald. The young Irish baronet had also inherited a large fortune. After the wedding, Maurice Gerald and Louise visited Ireland and returned to Casa del Corvo. Only once the girl was jealous again. That day, her husband came home to the hacienda with a beautiful woman in his arms. She was not dead, but a wound in her bosom showed she had not long to live. To the question, "Who has done this?" she was only able to answer, "Diaz." It was the last word of Isidora Covarubio de los Llanos. Gerald tracked down the murderer and brought him to the fort for a trial. There are new names for men, places, and things now in Texas, but you may still hear a strange story connected with these parts. It is the story of the Headless Horseman.